I'm sorry for um, running late. Unfortunately, I had to run. I am in the shelter. However, my kids had to join me in the shelter right now. And that is the reality we're living in right now. So, one moment, I'm just going to share a link. Well, before I share a link, I was thinking today I had quite an event. Hezbollah, as they're known, has the joined the fight or rejoined the fight, and that adds another level of complexity to these things. So when my son and I were coming back from the mall, we went to go pick up some stuff. Some could argue, why leave the house at all? Nevertheless, we've been home for a week. So we drove to get something. And on the way back in the car, a missile hit right by us. And it's actually on the news in the Ella Valley. It hit a satellite farm. If I recall correctly, the satellite farm it's not like a military. Well, to be honest, I think stupidly enough, Israelis shared this information with like pictures on WhatsApp groups that went back to Hezbollah, and now Hezbollah is taking credit as if they aimed for there, but they don't have such sophisticated weaponry. Secondly, it's not like a military. It's not a strategic point, so to speak. Or a base. It was sold years ago to some other network company that uses it to bounce off these satellites over here. Or maybe that's maybe that's the story. That's the cover story. Anyways, it was quite rattling. My son was with me, like I said, in the car, and we came back home, and that's a much bigger can of worms to unpack. The effects of that, and the fact that I'm in this same room right now, but this gave me the push to talk more about redemption, even though I speak much about redemption, and you guys know that I'm a messianist. I wanted to be more specific, and these are things that I might have discussed over the years on streams in more of a flowy way, just sort of the flow of the conversation. But today I wanted to focus a little more on Messiah's name and really what that means. So this is something that I was actually writing up in Hebrew to give to a class Saturday night or Friday night by me. But I decided to do a quick translation into English. And then I added some other stuff that I was just thinking about since I got back. So this is quite fresh. And that's why I'm thinking of reading it from what I have written down, just because I want to sort of work it out. Now, because I'm going to do it like this and sort of not do it freehand as I usually do these things, I'm wondering if I should have a link open because people could join and participate in that. But I am trying to get through these ideas. And perhaps then we could talk about it. So I'm apologizing for actually reading this. Secondly, would you prefer to see the text I'm reading in front of you as well? Or I'm just going to read it off the screen. And lastly, should I have a link open if people want to join? Just more as a cultural thing as we're filling up the screen? Or do you guys want to, you could, I'll drop the link later on. So those are out there. Anyone who wants to participate or respond is welcome to do so in the comments. I'm going to start in another minute. I just want to edit one last thing of something I said. I actually brought in a Jordan Peterson quote that is very resonant. Steven's here. He'd like to have the text on screen. Okay, it's just like a Word document, but sure. Yes. Okay, so text on screen. In bio. And this is like, this is the tools of ChatGPT where I took it in Hebrew and I just dropped it on. So again, you'll excuse its formatting. Okay. I don't think I'm going to get emotional, but if I do, you'll excuse me. Remain optimistic, of course. Yo's back with us. That is nice. Okay. Add full screen. Document. Share. Okay. Add to stage. Do we indeed have this document? Yes, we see this document as well. Okay. Just, I see that we have this note over here. I just want to mention that, first of all, thank you. But of course, the Torah we're learning now is in honor of all those who are wounded. They should have a speedy recovery. Whether it's innocent Iranians or any other country that's getting lambasted right now. Of course, my fellow Jews and my Muslim brothers and sisters and cousins that are living in this country as well that have to dealing with that. And that there should be an elevation of those, of the soul of those who were deceased, unfortunately, in this last battle. So yes, so that's of course. So I've gone. Yes, it is a little traumatic, but we are safe, of course. So I just want to put that out there. Okay. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this. No, wrong document. All right. If we look carefully, the Torah speaks consistently about redemption. It speaks about exile and the return, curse, blessing, destruction, and restoration. But it rarely speaks in explicit terms about a personal messianic redeemer, right? For example, in Deuteronomy, the redemption is direct. God will gather the exiles. God will return his people. God will restore the covenant. The emphasis is not on the messianic personality, but on divine action in history. The personal figure of the Messiah becomes such a much more profound later, especially in the prophetic literature. So I'm just going to make this a little bigger for me. There we begin to hear about the branch of David, the shoot that emerges, the king who will rule with justice, the servant of God, the ruler of Bethlehem, the one who through whom history will be healed. So already we see something very important, right? I can see how this translation is not how I would actually write this out in English, but again, bear with me. The Torah anchors us in the eternal structure of covenant. The prophets introduce a more dynamic and disruptive force, the force of historical transformation. This is why the messianic idea appears more strongly there. Because messianism is not merely about preserving order, it's about breaking open the present order in order to bring the world to its deeper truth, right? We want to get to that eighth day. The name of Messiah before creation. The sages say something astonishing. The Gemara, the Talmud in Tractate Nedarim teaches 7 things were created before the world was created. The Torah, repentance, Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, Gehenna, the throne of glory, the temple, and the name of Messiah. This statement is extraordinary. What does it mean for something to be created before the world? It does not mean simply that these things existed chronologically earlier, as though there was some kind of temporal warehouse before creation. Rather, it means that these are conditions for the meaningful existence of the world, right? Without them, the world could not fulfill its purpose. The world cannot exist without Torah, because without truth and instruction, there is no direction. It cannot exist without repentance, because without return, there is no hope. It cannot exist without the temple, because without a point of encounter, there is no sanctified world. And it cannot exist without the name of Messiah, because without redemption, history would have no guaranteed destination. But here we must notice something subtle. The Gemara does not say that the Messiah himself was created before the world. It says his name was created before the world. Why name? In Hebrew, it's Shem, because in Hebrew, a name, Shem, is not only a label. A name reveals an essence, an identity, and often purpose. We hear this expression in Hebrew, Leshema, for the sake of what? Towards what purpose? So the name of the Messiah means the messianic purpose of reality preceded creation itself. God did not create the world whose final destiny was uncertain. He created a world whose end is already sorry, did I no? Yes, oriented towards redemption. That does not mean the path is simple. It does not mean history is painless. It does not mean everything is obvious, but it does mean that reality is not meaningless. The end is already present in its hidden form at the beginning. Moving on. Chaos, exile, and the spirit of hovering over the waters. This idea appears already in the opening chapter of Bereshit, of Genesis. The Torah says, "And the earth was tohu vavoh, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters." Merachefet al pnei hamayim. At first glance, this is a description of primordial chaos, but the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah reads, this is the commentary, reads these words not only cosmologically, but historically. The Midrash says, chaos is the exile of Babylon. Void is the exile of Persia. Darkness is the exile of Greece, and the deep is the exile of Rome. In other words, the primordial chaos of Genesis is not only the chaos before creation, it is also the chaos that reappears throughout history in the form of exile, empire, and oppression, and civilizational disorder. All of history dislocations are echoes of the first disorder, but then comes the crucial line. And the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. The Midrash says, this is the spirit of the King of Messiah. That is an astonishing interpretation. It means that already at the moment of chaos, already before form has emerged, already in the darkness itself, the redemptive spirit is present. Not visibly, not triumphantly, not yet in completion, but hovering. This is one of the deepest Jewish ideas about history. Chaos is real, exile is real, collapse is real, empires are real, and suffering is real. But the redemptive spirit is also real, and it is present even before order fully appears. Moving on. Hidden order inside disorder. This gives us a new way to think about history. History is not a straight line. It does not progress in a smooth or predictable way. It contains collapse, reveal, it predicts tragedies, confusions, and absurdities. And yet, from a Torah perspective, that does not mean that there is no order. There is a profound image that helps explain this. Sometimes a knot is formed precisely through the loosening of another knot. At first, all we see is unraveling. We think something is coming apart. But if we could step back, we might discover that through this very untying, a new structure is being formed. This is the messianic process. Through destruction, something is built. Through fractures, something is being rearranged. Through exile, something is being prepared. Through failure, some hidden truth is being extracted. This is why Rabbi Akiva could laugh when he saw the fox emerge from the ruins of the holy city. The Gemara in Makot tells us why the others wept, right? The rabbis went on and they saw the destroyed Jerusalem and they were crying, right? Why? And he laughed. Why did he laugh? Because the prophecy of destruction has been fulfilled. Then the prophecy of redemption will also be fulfilled. Right? They were crying because they saw destruction. He was happy because he understands that this is part of the pattern. If I saw one part of the pattern emerge, there will be a continuation of this pattern as well, and redemption will be fulfilled. His optimism was not an emotional naivete. It was fidelity to the structure of the sacred history. This is also the meaning of Gamzu L'Tova. This too is for the good, how we talk about Rabbi Akiva says something similar, and this is talking about Nachum Ish Gamzu. It does not mean that evil is good. It means that evil does not have the final word. It means that somehow through the divine guidance of history, the negative can be taken up into its higher good. As we see with Joseph, as he tells his brothers that you guys had your own ideas, but of course God had other plans. At this point, it's worth noting that Judaism is not the only worldview that sees development in history. Modern philosophy has also developed ideas of historical ascent. For example, and I was speaking to an Israeli crowd, so I'm going to be using Israeli philosophers over here. One example is Henry Bergson, who spoke of the élan vital, the vital impulse. Bergson believed that there is a living force within reality pushing it upward, from matter to life, from life to consciousness, from consciousness towards ever greater refinement and transcendence. In light of evolutionary theory, geology, and modern sciences was a powerful vision. Reality seemed to display an inner tendency towards growth and emergence. Now, at first glance, it sounds close to the Jewish idea of the redemptive history. But Rav Kook insists that the similarity is not only partial. A thinker named Dr. Kanemika once pointed out parallel between Bergson's thoughts and Rav Kook. Rav Kook responded warmly, appreciating the content point, but he immediately clarified the difference. Bergson comes from Yefet, from the realm of general human wisdom. This is the tense of Jefet. This is an idea that we've spoken about in the past, where there's beauty, human wisdom out there. But Rav Kook's vision comes from the tent of Shem, from the Torah itself. And the idea is that Yefet to be housed in the tents of Shem. And what is the difference? Rav Kook explains it beautifully. For Bergson, history is like an arrow shot from a bow. It has force, it has direction, it's moving upward. But it does not know whether it will reach its destination. Perhaps it will, perhaps it will fall. That is why Rav Kook calls Bergson a modern climber, someone climbing upwards without knowing where the mountain leads. But Judaism says something much more radical. History is not merely being pushed from behind, it is being pulled from in front. We do not move only because of past force, we move because a future attraction. That is the meaning of the name of Messiah, the name of Mashiach. The future already calls to us. The end already exerts a force on the present. The best image for this is how it is not an arrow propelled by the bow, but an arrow made of iron being drawn by a magnet. The goal is already active. The Jewish people, that is the Jewish concept of the Messianic history. And by the way, just I'll pause over here because I give this example in the point, but we need an orientation point. In this metal arrow, speaking from my perspective, of course, Judaism sees itself as the arrow tip, but without the back, without the frame, without all those pieces, it falls. We just see ourselves oriented towards that way, not in any way more important than the rest of the arrow. This also helps us understand two related expressions in the words of the sages: the spirit of Messiah, Ruchosh Mashiach, and the light of Mashiach, the light of Messiah. The spirit of Messiah means the hidden direction of history, the divine movement already hovering over the waters of chaos. The light of the Messiah means the growing manifestation of the direction within the concerted, the concrete events on the ground, how we actually see that manifesting. And one of the most beautiful examples appears in the Midrash on the sale of Joseph. The Midrash says the brothers were busy selling Joseph. Joseph was busy with his sackcloth and fasting. Reuven was busy with his repentance. Yaakov was busy with his mourning. Judah was busy with taking a wife. And God was busy creating the light of the King Messiah. What a profound image. Everyone is occupied with their own narrow story. Everyone is caught in pain, guilt, confusion of ordinary life. No one sees the full picture. But in the hidden depths of the event, the light of redemption is already being born. This is a major key to understanding Jewish history. The Messianic process is often invisible while it is happening. People think they are dealing with family drama, political crisis, exile, disappointment, or practical concerns, and yet beneath all that, the light is being prepared. This is why the Gemara, the Talmud, says that the Messiah comes behesech dat, when the mind is distracted, unexpectedly. In Sanhedrin, in Tractate Sanhedrin, Rabbi Zera sees sages discussing the Messiah too intensely and says, "Please, I beg you, do not push him away." Then the Gemara says, three things come when a person is not expecting them: a found object, right? Everyone loves finding that dollar in their pocket, a scorpion, and the Messiah. This is a remarkable comparison. A found object is an unexpected good. A scorpion is an unexpected danger. And the Messiah is something that arrives from beyond our controlled calculations. The Maharsha explains, another sage, that for some people, the Messiah is like finding a treasure, while others, he is like a scorpion. Why? Because any true Messianic transformation is disruptive. It saves, but it also disrupts. It heals, but it also overturns. It fulfills, but it also ultimately judges. This is why the Rambam writes, no person knows how these things will be until they occur, right? Jacob from our little corner, of course, discusses this often, this Rambam in the Laws of Kings. So Judaism rejects simplistic Messianic predictions, but at the same time, a history unfolds, contours begin to emerge. And from a religious Zionist perspective, especially, and everyone knows the caveats being on Jacob's channel over here, one could say that we are not only near Messianic events, we may already be inside some of them. Okay, let's get into the names themselves. Bar Naphtali, the Messiah, son of the fallen movements. One of the most surprising titles of the Messiah in the Gemara is Bar Nafli, the son of the fallen. This is in Sanhedrin, and it's based on a verse in Amos. On that day, I will rise up the fallen booth of David. Why would the Messiah be called the son of the fallen? Because history is filled with fallen attempts at redemption. Humanity is always generating messianic projects, political utopias, philosophical systems, revolutionary ideologies, empires of justice, universalist versions of peace. Again and again, human beings imagine that they have found the key to redeeming the world. And again, those systems fail. Communism failed. Christian universalism failed. Secular humanism is in its strong redemptive forms has also shown its limits. Many revolutions, movements failed. Many dreams collapsed. So they are meaningless? The answer is given here is no. The Messiah is called Bar Nafle because he gives retroactive meaning to the falls. He gathers from each collapse the point of truth, or what we call the divine sparks that must be preserved. Marxism collapsed, but his concern for labor dignity and social justice remained. Christianity, from the Jewish theological point of view, is deeply flawed, but it helps spread the moral vocabulary of love and charity in vast areas of the world. Even false messianism often contained fragments of real longing. The true messianic process does not merely erase them. It redeems the sparks hidden within them. I'm sorry, I'm going I forgot that I mentioned sparks, so hence I'm mentioning sparks again. This is a very deep principle. I'll just mention over here that, again, this messianic power, right? You could look at even David Ben Gurion, right, as like a messianic figure, right? He comes to the land, he's disruptive, he clearly sees himself as such. He still fails because we're not there. But he could be someone that I would categorize under this concept of a Messiah. When a great movement fails, do not ask only what was false in it. Ask also the truth trapped inside it, waiting to be rescued, right? And we've spoken about often how Abraham goes down to Egypt and Joseph goes down to Egypt, and even when eventually the Israelites leave, they're all each time taking with them, rescuing from them things from the belly of Egypt as well. This principle is not limited to ideological history. It's part of the role of Israel itself. Israel repeatedly emerges from within broken civilizations and extracts from them some redeemable essence. Sorry about this again. Egypt imagined itself as total order, a perfected civilization, yet it became a house of slavery, and still something emerged from Egypt, Israel. Even Sodom, which seems like the ultimate symbol of moral corruption, contains a hidden redeemer. The Midrash says regarding David, where did I find David? In Sodom. What does that mean? It means that even in Sodom, there was some distorted longing for social structure, some broken form of idealism, some fallen energy that later could be transformed and elevated. That does not justify Sodom. It means only that history is so deep that even evil systems often parasitize some fragment of the truth. The messianic process involves separating the spark from the shell, the klipa. Spoke about this with Olson. I mentioned this a little. Another central name is Mashiach is Tzemach, the sprout. This name teaches a different aspect of redemption. Not collapse, not dramatic rupture, but a slow organic growth. The Yerushalmi, the tractate Yerushalmi, because there's the Babylonian Talmud and there's the Yerushalmi Talmud, compares redemption to the dawn in the valley of Arbel. I think about this often. I get to visit there often and actually stand in the valley and also on the top of Arbel, and it is indeed breathtaking. At first, there is only a tiny crack of light. Then gradually the light increases. So too the redemption of Israel comes, little by little. Kima. This is one of the most important correctives to unhealthy messianism. Not everything arrives in an apocalyptic form. Not everything happens overnight. Not every true beginning looks impressive. Redemption often starts in forms that appear small, fragile, partial, and disappointing. That is why the Messiah is called Tzemach, the sprout. A sprout is not dramatic. It does not arrive like thunder. It grows quietly, organically, and irreversibly. This is also connected to Judah. Yehudah is described as a lion cub. From prey, my son, you have risen. He begins as a gur, a cub. Then he becomes an aryeh, a lion. Then a lavi, a mature lion. This is translated in English, of course. Kingship belongs to the one who can grow patiently. Only one who can tolerate gradual process can truly rule. At this point, a very important Jewish distinction appears. There's a danger in focusing too much on the personality of Messiah. Rabbi Hillel once said in a shocking statement that Israel has no Messiah. The Gemara strongly rebukes him, but it is still a point of truth hidden in what he said. His intuition was that the process is more central than the personality. In Christianity, the Redeemer is everything. His person is the essence of the drama. In Judaism, even while the Messiah is important, the Redeemer remains secondary to God's action and to the redemptive process unfolding through the life of the nation. That is why one can imagine a scenario in which the exiles have gathered, the land is rebuilt, prophecy returns, the temple is restored, the Shekhinah appears, and only then does a political figure from the house of David emerge to take his place. The Messiah does not have to initiate every stage. He may also be a product of the process. This is a major distinction between the Jewish and Christian conceptions of redemption. Now, again, this is again a translation when I'm speaking to people here in my neighborhood. Obviously, there's more nuance when it comes to Christians and their beliefs, as we all know here in the TLC, but I'm speaking in generalizations because that's how we communicate. I also mentioned over here that Maimonides also mentions that the order of the Messianic period is also, we don't have that order. So it's not like one has to be before the other. The sages give many names of Messiah, and each name reveals an aspect of the redemptive task. Bar Nafli, as we said, the one who lifts up the fallen and extracts truth from failed redemptions. Semach, the one who grows slowly and organically through history. David Acher, there's another name he gets, which is the other David. The one whose political role may initially appear strange, controversial, or even threatening, to establish religious expectations. This is a very striking idea. The restorer of the Jewish sovereignty may not initially appear in the form the religious world was expecting. He may come clothed in unfamiliar garments. Now, this is very important to understand. Also, the term acher, there's a famous rabbi named Elisha ben Avuya. He is also known as acher, as the other, because he's considered controversial or even a heretic. There are other groups called acherim, which also they because of certain behaviors they had, they were seen as the other. So here too, it's a play on the idea that calling him other David is saying that it's David, but he's dressed with the otherness. So potentially coming from a distance, coming from afar. And that's where we have to also dare to be brave enough to dream of what it would look like. And this is obviously going in between many divisions within Judaism itself, right? Whether it's the ultra-Orthodox or the national religious or the Reform, like what this entity, what this person looks like. Even if there is a Redeemer, how would I know if I would expect him? And if I'm assuming he's going to have to look and sound exactly like me, that's thinking very small. Ephraim. This represents national power, military force, and the stage of physical liberation, right? Many times we call this also the Josephite Messiah. Before the higher spiritual layers of redemption can emerge, the nation must first be able to stand, defend itself, and live, right? This is why the idea of the Zionistic movement, even if it's coming from, a lot of people like to say, well, it's completely secular, right? How can this be like, the biblical, the return of Zionism, or many, this comes both from anti-Semitics and from people within the Jewish fold would have issues with the secular establishment of Israel. But here, if you're looking at it in this sense, where it's national and military force and it's a physical liberation, the rabbis were hesitant to move. Sometimes you need to have that exterior, right? That exoskeleton of secularity, right? Can actually make these kind of moves of standing and defending itself. And only then can you move on to a different process, a spiritual process, a Davidic Messiah. Anyway, I transgress. Hashem Sitkenu, the Lord is our righteousness. This is another name. This name points to justice. Messianism is not only a national return or spiritual awakening, it's also building a society of righteousness, fairness, and moral yashrut, being oriented properly. This is why, I wonder why I couldn't translate that. This is why movements of redemption often contain a passion for social justice, even if their ideological expression is flawed. And I talk about this often when I see Greta Thunberg, when I see what's going on in campuses in the States, right? Even when it had to do with Gaza. Unfortunately now, Ironically, now you don't hear anything about Iran right now, so the hypocrisy is screaming. But with regards to even the war of Gaza, the fact that so many students are out there and are outraged about this, I believe that they're seeing a skewed version of reality. Nevertheless, that spirit is messianic, I would say. Avdi, another name, my servant. The Messiah is not merely a ruler, he's also a servant, one who bears, carries, and elevates the burdens of the people. Then there's another tractate that mentions these all names together: Menachem, Shiloh, Yinon, and Hananiah. Each of these names points to another dimension. Menachem is comfort. Shiloh, holiness expanding into life and nature. Yinon, beauty and aesthetic renewal. Chanina, grace, gift, and unearned kindness. The initials of these names in Hebrew spell Mashiach in Hebrew, suggesting that the messianic idea itself is multidimensional, right? No one teacher in the story in the Talmud, each student comes and says, I learned that this is the name of Messiah. And it happens to be that each one of these students, their rabbi's name is similar to the names of the Messiah that they're giving right over here. So when we're saying over here, no teacher, no one ideology, no one movement contains it all. Each may hold one aspect. So each one of these students was pointing out to you that there's an aspect of my rabbi, of my teacher, that's messianic, and so on and so forth. Why the Messiah must also be political. The Gemara, the Talmud, right, when asking which historical sages might truly qualify as potential messianic figures, points to individuals who had two things in common. They were from the line of David, obviously, and they held actual political office. For example, Daniel, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, and Rav Nachman. And this is deeply important. The Messiah in Judaism is not only a saint, it's not a mystic, not only a spiritual guide. He would also be able to function in history as a national leader. People like to say about a warrior running around like with a sword. We're talking about someone with a political power, right? A national leader. This is why Rabbi Akiva did not declare himself Messiah, even though he was the greatest sage of the generation. Instead, he identified Bar Kokhba as the messianic candidate because Bar Kokhba was engaged in political and military liberation, right? Obviously, he failed ultimately. This point is decisive. Judaism does not seek merely the salvation of individual souls detached from history. It seeks a redemption of people in the world, in a land, in a sovereignty, in justice, in holiness, in culture, in a collective life. That's why when someone says, in effect, I have come only to save your souls, not to restore your national life, the Jewish answer is that's not enough. The Messiah must be able to redeem not only inwardly, but also historically. And so for conclusion, so we return to where we began. Actually, there's a part that I talked about this earlier, which is not less relevant to here, but I'll still continue reading this. Judaism lives between two forces. Well, I'll skip through this because this doesn't have anything to do with that. Okay, to remain loyal to the Torah while still believing the world can be transformed, to remain faithful to halakha while still hearing the call of redemption, to remain grounded in memory while also being pulled by the future. And this is why Messiah's name was created before the world, because the world only makes sense if it is going somewhere. Not everything in history is good. Not every moment is holy. Not every revolution is redemption. But beneath the chaos, the spirit hovers. Within the fractures, as we said, a direction is forming. Okay. Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's continue. This is where I added some lines over here. So I'll go back over here. Behind the visible confusion of history, the light is being prepared. And the deepest Jewish faith, is that history is not closed inside darkness. It's being drawn slowly, painfully, often invisibly towards redemption. And perhaps this brings us to the moment we ourselves are living through. If the messianic process unfolds slowly, sometimes invisibly, sometimes through events that only later reveal their meaning, then every generation must ask itself a difficult question. Are we merely watching history unfold, or are we actually living inside one of the turning points? At a certain rare moment, the wings of history seem to beat more loudly. And many people today feel that we are living in such a moment. We feel something unusual in the air, something larger than ordinary political events, something that carries echoes of the biblical scale of history, definitely in Israel, of course. And this feeling has not appeared only in the last few days. In truth, it has accompanied us throughout the past 2.5 years. So the question becomes, what exactly has changed in the recent days? Why do we sense a heightened intensity, almost an unusual excitement? Is it simply another episode, an ongoing story, or could something more fundamental be taking place? One way to understand it is perhaps we are finally completing the task. We know that King Saul was criticized because he did not finish the mission of being given as he spared Agag, the king of Amalek. And now we see the elimination of a modern enemy of the Jewish people. From that perspective, one could say, when the wicked perish, there is a rejoicing. But I want to add another dimension beyond simply finishing a task. Even if we hope that the mission has been completed and there is still a long road ahead of us, I believe something deeper is taking place. Personally, it fills me, this is what I was thinking about today, with a special sense of excitement in these days that we are living through. I believe that the state of Israel as a state has moved from one stage to another. Previously, the goal of our military actions was primarily survival. The objective was to neutralize threats such as Iran's nuclear capabilities. In other words, there exists a powerful nation that seeks to destroy us, and we will do everything necessary to defend ourselves. Never again is not merely a slogan, it is a policy which the state of Israel operates. This is something new. This now is something new, something meaningful, something critical. But notice what lies behind this language. We want to defend ourselves. After everything we have been through, after the Holocaust, the question remains, will the Jewish people once again be destroyed? The answer is no. Thank God we have an army, and we are capable of defending ourselves in the state of Israel. And that essentially is the message. We exist in order to protect ourselves. When groups of pre-military academics visit, this is a visit I did in the Lon Barat, I have an opportunity to thank and speak to them, right? And this is when I was working with Yeshivat HaKotel. When I was teacher in Yeshivat HaKotel, we would do these groups over there. One of the first questions they ask is, why are we fighting? What are we fighting for? Why are we fighting over these lands? And almost always the answer is the same, because we have no other place. We tried exile and we were murdered. We tried other options. We were killed. We have no other land. And their idea, here we could defend ourselves. And I asked them, is that all, right? Is that all we have to offer the world? The entire Israeli-Arab conflict, the entire Jewish-Muslim conflict does not exist simply so that one more nation could survive. Did the Jewish people return after thousands of years of exile merely to secure their own survival? Something about that sounds thin, narrow, and pale. And the truth is, it's not so. Speaking about a safe refuge, right, is a very basic and very low level of understanding. Perhaps this is how other nations define themselves. But for the people of Israel, it would be nothing less than a betrayal of our mission. From the very beginning of our national history, beginning with Abraham, we were told, through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Later, before the giving of the Torah, we were told you should be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. What is the purpose of priests? They serve as a bridge between the people of the sacred, between society and moral values. If Israel is the kingdom of priests, then we as a nation are meant to serve as a bridge between the world and morality, between humanity and holiness, between mankind and God. As like I often said, we are the chimney cleaners of the world. Everyone is invited inside the house. Our job is to be the chimney cleaners, to make sure that relationship between the divine and us is kept clean and open. This is why we came into the world. As the famous verse in Isaiah says, I have given you as a light to the nations, to be my salvation to the ends of the earth. From here comes the well-known phrase, a light unto the nations. In our prayers, we say every day, to perfect the world under the sovereignty of God. Originally, this prayer was said only during the high holidays, but the sages saw that it is important that they instituted at the end of every daily prayer. This means that the idea of tikkun olam, repairing the world, is not some marginal concept on the fringes of Judaism. People like to throw around this idea of tikkun olam. It is the very foundation of Israel's existence. Therefore, to speak only in the language of survival, never again, there won't be another Holocaust, or here's the modern Hitler, right? It's not enough. It's far too small. Rav Kook, who greatly developed Judaism, as you guys know, as Jewish nationalism in the modern era, wrote explicitly that nationalism without universal vision is merely an expanded egoism. What is the difference between the agnostic individual who tramples others from his own benefits and a nation that tramples others in struggle of his own territory, right? Over a territory. We have to ask ourselves, are we just colonizers then? In the same, it is the same thing, perhaps even worse. Instead of one's egoist, you have one's ego, right? You have entire nations of egoists. Rav Kook therefore asks a difficult moral question regarding the conquest of the land of Israel. How can it be that by divine command we would harm the welfare of humanity for the sake of our own benefit, right? Isn't this also what all the haters want to hear? How do we do this? His answer is that we require this land in order to bring our blessing to the entire world. That is Israel's message. Throughout human history, the Jewish people have indeed influenced the world profoundly. Historians, philosophers, and religious thinkers repeatedly marvel at the extraordinary contribution of Israel to humanity. Today's people often emphasize Israel's achievement in technology and the startup nation. That is certainly an important contribution. Or people talk about our desalination or making the USB discount key contribution and something that we take pride in. But our deeper contribution lies in the moral message we brought to the world. Historians such as Paul Johnson, who wrote The History of the Jews, and thinkers such as Thomas Chale, who wrote The Gifts to the Jews, describe in detail how the Jewish people transformed human thought and moral consciousness. Now let us return to our current war. If the earlier phase of our struggle emphasized Israel's survival, doing whatever is necessary, even daring operations thousands of kilometers away in Iran, then something new is emerging. A new language has begun to appear. For the first time in generations, Israeli leaders have begun speaking about freeing the Iranian people from the tyranny of the Ayatollah regime. Someone might ask, who are you to intervene? Should you not simply defend yourself? Why are you acting as the policeman of the world? And the answer is, at last, the people of Israel are beginning to speak in the language of moral responsibility towards the world. This can be frightening because we are caught between two extremes. On one side stands a radical Islam, which believes it possesses the truth and seeks to impose it on the whole world by force through jihad and conquest. On the other hand, on the other side, stands Europe, which has abandoned the very concept of truth and morality and therefore cannot defend anything. So the world faces a choice between two options. Either you lose your sense of justice and collapse internally, or you attempt to dominate the world through violence. Here lies the unique message of Israel. We believe that truth exists. We believe that good and evil exists, but we do not seek to conquer the world. We do not seek to convert everyone to Judaism. We are not imperialists. Even compared to the great powers such as Britain or the United States, our vision is different. Our wars are defensive, primarily to protect the inheritance of our ancestors. Israel offers a different model to the world, a moral and spiritual vision that does not impose itself by force, but serves as an example and as an inspiration. Gradually, the world can walk in its light. For the first time in generations, this language has begun to reappear in Israel's discourse. We are beginning to move from the language of safe refuge to the language of the moral mission. There is still a long road ahead, but these are the first signs. And I've spoken about how also the return of prophecy with regards to Israel's cultural, not renaissance, but really rebirth in a certain sense in its land. We spoke about that in the weekly portion review and in other times. Interestingly, righteous people among the nations already recognize this. British journalist Douglas Murray, as we all know, author of Strangest of Europe, has repeatedly said that Israel is fighting the war of the free world. If Israel loses, he says, the entire free world loses. In that sense, Israel stands on the front line. Jordan Peterson expressed something similar a few years ago when he visited Israel, when I was there. With tears in his eyes, he asked, are you telling the greatest story ever told? The answer depends on how you choose to live. For reasons that are difficult to explain, the entire world looks at this small nation. You carry a tremendous moral responsibility. In some sense, he said, the fate of the world depends on the decisions of the people of Israel. When Israel lives according to its mission, it becomes a light onto the nations. It shows the world what a holy city could look like. So if we summarize what is unique about this moment in history, it's not only that the mission may be reaching a completion, it is that we begin to move from consciousness of survival to the consciousness of a moral purpose. Instead of us defining ourselves only by tragedies of the past, we must rediscover our deepest mission, to guide humanity towards justice and truth. May we merit that the nation which rose like a lion to defend, and that's the name of, or roaring like the lion of the mission, to defend Amkela Kum, our first mission, the first war, and our survival will continue to raise its voice like a lion to bring more light to the world and to help repair the world under the sovereignty of Hashem. And instead of bringing every visiting leader to visit Yad Vashem when they come to Israel, perhaps one day we will first bring them to the Western Wall, and soon, God willing, into the rebuilt temple or to the house of prayer of all nations in Jerusalem. May we merit to see more good news and more extraordinary chapters of history unfolding before our eyes. All right. That was the message. I will add a link. No one feels like they have to come in, which is totally fine. I just really wanted to get some of that off my chest. So those were the names. I should clarify, this understanding or this interpretation of these names. Obviously, as you saw, much of it is based on, all of it's based on Jewish sources. Not many of it. All of it's based on Jewish sources. However, the interpretation of some of these sources, I lean on certain rabbinical figures that I follow. Not everyone has to agree with them. Not everyone necessarily will interpret it this way, but this is very much the reality that I'm seeing in front of us. And I've often said since the war that we're living in biblical times. And I feel like we're living not only in biblical times, but in specific biblical times, at the end of biblical times. This also relates to I don't know if I wanna give it a specific name, but there is some professor who recently is Gilad. It's been a long time, man.
It has, yeah.
I don't know how much of that you heard. You jumped on right now.
I heard the middle to the end. I don't know exactly when you started.
But it was very, it's very, very religiously oriented.
I wouldn't. I'm not so sure.
No, I like that. I like that response.
Yeah, I'm not sure you interpreted the right way, but it's
maybe
okay.
I misinterpreted you. I meant religious as in far as like, it's like it's very much based on scripture and like religious texts and understanding.
Yeah, I think I just what I was trying to express is that I think the implications that you're pointing to are not found within like the personal religious journey that every man must face as it's seen like,
what do you mean?
This is something that Nishitani was talking about. Like at some point you have to sort of face the nothingness of existence, and you must sort of come to terms with it in whatever way, like within a journey that one man like that you must somehow undergo. And that's sort of the I don't know, archetypal religious quest. And I think what you're describing is what I usually find very off about religious institutions that sort of thwart that rather than support it.
Well, I think we have to differentiate between the individual and the collective. I think as an individual, I don't know how much of an olive branch that is, but as an individual, obviously there's reality you also have to sort of deal with. As a collective, there's things that are again, obviously speaking from a religious perspective, these are hello, Kirk. These are things that, as a believing man, right, I believe that these are things that were promised us. However, um, what I was gonna say, and it creates a lot of pressure. I feel like this sense of urgency. Basically, I feel like I saw this professor online. I don't want to give his name because I think he's like promoting conspiracy theories. However, he laid out like there's like 27 class series. I'm like, there's like a facade of something being very professional when he speaks, and he speaks about how ultimately, with all these political moves happening in the world right now, geopolitical moves happening, um, uh, that Israel ends up taking over. Okay, and it's like it's and he was right about like he predicted that we're going to attack Venezuela and we're going to attack Iran. So like he's been getting like a lot. He's going quote unquote viral. But as I'm listening to this, and there's a lot of like the Frankists and the Rothschilds, and he explains like this whole move that's been happening, and like these people want to like bring prophecy to happen, like they're trying to manifest it, and there's like the elders of Zion, all that stuff inside. However, it was interesting to see him like map it geopolitically, saying at some point we're going to attack here, the war is not going to go well, they're going to get involved. And as a believing Jew, right, it's very hard for us to think about like, what would the messianic process look like? How would that actually look like? And here, ironically, an anti-Semite or a conspiracy theorist is drawing out this map, which to me is like, if things happen that way, that could be, quite interesting, because it's almost like I need to like tilt it a little to be like, again, realizing the opportunity Israel has right now, and the things that could, so much is on the shoulders, I feel like, of Israel. Like there's almost no more time anymore for any of the political nonsense happening over here. Like, you are playing at the highest level possible right now, right? Potentially in bringing in like a world war. There just isn't time for, on all the layers. It's it's crazy. We know now when a missile is coming, like the precision of like when it's coming and where it's going to hit, but we still like can't get like trains on time like in Israel. There's like one thing like broken within Israel itself. Like, we need to get our act together. And then like just politically, socially, there's just like isn't time for these fights anymore. There isn't time for these political divides. And that's why I feel like very, very pressured, because on one hand, I feel like there's a great opportunity is here. On the other hand, you look inside Israel and you look at the circus happening over here, and you look at like, the language used over here, and it's concerning. So,
and does prophecy, I'm not that well versed in messianism, does prophecy have that fail state? Like if the time comes and we're not ready, do we have like Choban Bait? Like what does the failure of prophecy look like in messianic perception?
So first of all, interesting question. So one, there's an idea that like, there won't be a third exile. There's that idea out there. But the prophets, unlike in like the Greek myths, right? Like, it's not like that's my destiny. Like, the blind face, like in Greek mythology, like they have the one eye and that's your destiny. You can't break it. In Judaism, that is a reality that could happen, that will come to pass if you don't change your ways, if you don't do X, Y, Z. Now, there's an idea beitah chishena, or there's kima kima, slowly. So, obviously, if we correct our ways, then redemption could happen hastily. However, if we take it can happen immediately. However, if we are slow, then this is a drawn out process. Having said that, though, we believe ultimately God will redeem us regardless. So, am I nervous that redemption is not on the horizon? No. Am I worried that like we could fumble and it could be extremely painful how we get into that redemption and how we get into that next stage? Of course, I would rather not be. I would rather it not be war. I'd rather not be with death and disruption. However, what I was reading over here, that the story is that there is disruption, that it is a painful process. Now, even understanding that transition periods are painful, even that should be done in the right way. So like even I'm zooming into something very micro, right? Which is like the judicial reform or the judicial what's how do you say mahapecha in English?
Overhaul.
Overhaul. Their judicial overhaul is an example where, let's say, even if there's a tension, doing it that way, like even if you have to figure out how to deal with that tension, how it manifested, on some states you could say that's the wrong way to go about how you're doing that. Others would say like, no, it needs to come to a head for like, for the shell to completely unleash itself and for reality to be, for the truth to be revealed, like for people to drop their masks, so to speak. If only we had the luxury of time to even do that. Like you're happy this is happening through a war, and again, there's like this sense of urgency where Israel is constantly being pushed. On one hand, you must settle these real issues, right, with the ultra orthodox, like religious and democratic. All these things are serious things that need to be resolved. On the other hand, you have existential issues that are actually happening that require your attention, that require your unity. And for me, that is like, that is like the last miracle, is the unity, is really, and that is sort of also the model to the world. Like, what does it look like? What does it look like you're unified? So
yeah. May
yes.
I contribute something here? What do you think Noahides have? What obligations and what general ideas do you think Noahides should engage with regards to this question of Jewish unity?
For Noahides right now need to be focused on building their own communities, being a moral person, doing good work. Like there's no actionable thing that, I mean, it could be like support Israel, but that's like sort of like that's just out there. How do they do unity? They should practice what the rabbis teach. Ultimately, if only Jews in Israel were doing that. I guess what some rabbis speak, and you could cite this. Some rabbis have deplorable ideas, but I can't give you like an action item. And maybe I'm failing you by doing that, but I can't tell you an action item of what to do. I think it's more important to be resilient with yourself. Make sure to anything that Israel has been doing so far, politically or socially, that makes sense. Obviously take note of that. But that's basically it.
And that's fine. I was just curious. But yeah, and may I integrate something with what you're talking about with regards to Messiah and anticipating the Messianic era?
Sure.
So I've only read a little bit, but there's a psychologist and philosopher named William James who had this idea of a specious present, where he goes that the past, present, and future, and it's also an idea I've heard picked up by people like Husserl, and so this has a long philosophical tradition where basically the present is filled with the past and future because we remember the past and we anticipate the future. And so this kind of reminds me of the Jewish messianic idea that like our behavior in the present, our observance of halacha, is in part an anticipation of the messianic era trying to bring about redemption. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And first of all, yes, William James. I'm saying there's like definitely like in the mystical traditions, like he's very involved over there as well. But we said this about prayer, and it's also true in a certain sense about keeping commandments. All these are dry runs, and this is also very much why when I speak to Jacob, I say like the place where Judaism gets to, like, I feel that Gilad and I are partaking in, and Gilad, I'm sorry that I'm bringing you into this, but we are partaking in the nation of Israel renewing itself in its land. That's the part of the process that we're in, and that doesn't look at all like people have to realize, like, both secularism and the ultra orthodox are both responses to modernity, right? None of these are quote unquote the OG Jew. And if you go back to what the OG Jew is, like, you can get into a whole conversation about like Ashkenazi Jews and where they're coming from. We have a story, we have a Bible, we have a tradition, and now we finally came back to our land, and we are starting to manifest that. Now, there's obviously quibbles of how much of modernity, of quote unquote concepts like liberalism and democracy, how much of that needs to actually be integrated. But but all of it is a dry run to come here, right? Speaking about which plants you're going to grow in the States, it's the story happens here. The people of Israel ultimately, and I've mentioned this often, how the Bible says when they come to the land, they should look at the nations around them and see, and see the nations around them have a king, and so you could take on a king. And there is the Netziv from Volozhin interprets this verse and says that we are supposed to see the political system that's working around us and adapt that, right? Judaism, we're not coming from nowhere over here. We're living within a context of other nations, of other people. And so we need to be playing a similar game to that. And that's why I think the nation of Israel, or the state of Israel, while I have many issues with it, I obviously see that as like a huge redemption element. And I believe that part of the tensions that both Gilad and I share is that we are definitely points over the last 2 years. It seems like we are at very close to unraveling this very, very, very delicate thing we have over here. And that would be, I mean, that's detrimental for many reasons. But this to me is like, where the rubber hits the road. This is where it's supposed to be happening. And you could only influence it from the inside. And like I was saying about how the messianic figure, I gave one of the names was David Acher, right? The other David, which is a David that's coming from the outside. Something that doesn't necessarily look like me or speak like me or is wearing my garbs, right? So what does it look like even to dare and think about like what that looks like? And I don't know if many classic interpretations or discussions about the Messiah work well with that. And that could be very scary for a lot of people. And I'll even say that obviously Jacob will disagree with a lot of what I'm saying over here. But to me, the secular element in Israel is a feature, not a bug, right? And I'm sorry, Gilad, if this sounds in any way patronizing or condescending, but I don't. Sorry, go ahead, Gilad. I've been rambling.
How have you been, Chazi?
How have I been? So like I said, great sense of urgency. I can't focus like on, if any clients of mine are listening to this, I'm focusing on your projects. They're very important. Having said that, it's very hard to like focus on those kind of things on multiple levels. So the most practical level of like, there might be a siren in a minute and my kids are going to run into the safe room, to the crazy experience that I had, a few hours ago with a missile almost hitting me. And I started the stream, Gilad, by saying that like I was driving by Emek Ha'ilah. I live by where the satellites are, and we saw it like hit over there. We were in the cars over there, so there was my son. Very, very scary. And hence I decided to do this stream right now because I felt like this urge to like do something, say something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay. If I may, I also am curious, to what extent do you believe this situation with regards to Iran? I've heard some people tie this into things like Gog Magog and other things. I don't know what your perspective is on people who talk about things like that.
I think people need to be extremely careful when they go to specific verses and say like what happened on Tuesday is like Zechariah 6:7. Like, that's very difficult to do. And actually, I want to actually respond to that by also responding to something that I made left open when Gilad asked about when prophecies go bad. In Judaism, good prophecies will always come to be. Bad prophecies can be avoided. Number one, as we see with Jonah and the people of Nineveh, right? They ultimately get redeemed, right? A generation later or 2 generations later, they get destroyed, but then they get redeemed. The Talmud says that people ask like, why are the prophets like seeing things differently? And it says that these are each prophet has his own personality, his own level of understanding, and he prophesies sort of in his style. And I've heard that it be interpreted before as, think about it like the multiverse idea of like there are many different options of how things are going to happen, right? If you look at Ezekiel's vision of the temple. It's different than Isaiah's version. Some of them are more inclusive, some of them are less inclusive, and this really has to do with where Israel is at that moment, right? Like do I think we're at like? There's a lot of wars emerging. There are Talmud verses that talk about how, Edom, which is seen as the West, is going to end up fighting Persia, which is Iran. So I don't like looking at those specific things. Like I said earlier when I spoke about this, about the trend that we're in. And to me, since 1948 until now, like we're moving at a certain direction. And it also feels like itself that like time itself is accelerated. So I think every moment is a redemption moment.
Yeah.
If we align ourselves properly. Could we miss the boat? That's what I'm talking about with Gilad.
Yeah.
Which is like, this could be a redemption that ends like in a year. It like that starts soon. This could be a redemption that gets dragged out. Like, does Israel get itself together and move forward properly? Like, one would think it's probably easier to fight a war, right, when you have like a Knesset that's working properly. That's a problem. One would think you'd win a war if you have members of Knesset that know how to keep their mouth shut and not get into scandals every other day. That is not going to help the war. Having like a prime minister that's being like in court constantly, right? Not ideal for, let's say, for a redemption prerequisites is like you should have your prime minister. So, that's tough. And hence I say, like, I feel there's like a sense of urgency, like I was telling Gilad, where like Gilad and I were having over the last 2 years, like many conversations. And I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think Gilad and I are examples of the reality on the ground in Israel, because we're very cordial with each other, and I believe there's an affection for each other, and I honestly see, in some sense, we see each other in a certain way, and because of that allows for this kind of conversation. Unfortunately, Israel's not there, so we had 2 years to have these conversations, and I almost feel like the last 2 years were wasted, right? Like, imagine what you would be like if you came into this war even more unified. But that's my answer, sort of, to you, Kirk.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I was just going to say was that basically, this whole idea of, it's kind of reminding me of an article. I didn't read all of it. I've skimmed through it and I read some of it. But it kind of reminds me of an article I posted in the links in Discord. I would really recommend you check it out, which talks about Kabbalistic and Hasidic views of temporality, where it says that in Judaism, temporality is related to this distinction between sanctity and profanity, where it's like there's a certain one of the reasons why Shabbat is so holy is because it's a moment in time where basically you put a lot of significance on every moment compared to the fleeting view of time, which we experience in our day-to-day week, where time passes really quickly. And that's kind of what you're saying. Kind of reminds me of that like we're kind of we're living in a moment where we're putting a lot more existential significance on every moment. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. You should also read about Heschel and speaking about the Shabbat as well.
It references Heschel. It references Heschel.
He gets into that as well. So tell me, Gilad, when you hear me saying this, does this do ideas like this like ultimately concern you? Do they make you feel like, oh, poor little Chazi?
I would say, I'll try to be honest, though I do feel a bit tenuous. I had, let's say, more contentious interactions here on the server, and I'm trying to navigate that. But I'll say that in the sense, in the way that it's sensed, the way I feel physically, I feel a deep terror and a sinking feeling in my gut that this is. I'm sorry, like
I'm only laughing because I'm like coming with all like it's gonna be okay, and like you're like it's doomed. I'm not laughing at what you're. I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing at the irony of it. Please.
No, I just hope that it's not coming out as like.
It's what I'm expecting. It's okay.
Yeah, no, but it sounds like I could give different examples, but I guess here in what Jacob calls the Peterson sphere, to me, it sounds like someone speaking about communism, right? It's one more utopian vision.
I mentioned that when I was reading that, like,
Yeah, but I listened from the middle. I'm sorry.
So what I was saying is that I was saying one of the names of Messiah is Bar Nafle, which it means like the fallen one, the son of the fallen one. And I was explaining how all these movements in history, they have their messianic energy to them, right? Communism there's a core to it about social justice that was remained, but like the rest didn't work. So all these things have shells. Now you could be saying, even this movement now, Chazi, is just another one of those like utopian visions that you want that's also going to, end up going bust ultimately. We're not there yet. I mean, I'm not saying we're not there yet. I feel like we're in the process. The urgency I feel is for us to find the popular formula, and I could be like, that even sounds even more dangerous because like you're gonna push to get things done. That like I'm not looking to manifest prophecy. I'm looking to orient ourselves properly so we could recognize when we're in those times, I guess. So like in the sense of someone could come and say like, listen, I need to blow up the Temple Mount, right? I'm going to an extreme because that's going to get me to the next level, right? So let's say an extreme be like, Hazi, that kind of talk leads, like, for example, I have this pin, right, of like the temple, right, that I wear like on the Sabbath. And now it's a problem because now I got it like a few years ago. Now it's built up like this whole thing around it, which is like, that means like there's like a political thing around that. I believe in what that stands for in a certain sense. I'm not looking to shoot a missile to make that happen. I'm looking to be the people that deserve that to manifest. How that looks could be, it's, the way I want it to be is all people praying together, right? So I'm not looking, like I said, like my vision isn't, we're not imperialists. We're not trying to oppress people. We're not trying to mission, like that's not at all what we're doing. I believe if we could properly be who Israel is, that just shines a light onto the other nations. Now, all that could sound nice and good, right? But and the reason I give it more credence is because it's not imperialistic, because it's not trying to do all these other moves, and like I mentioned, also that's also why I think that's the only right we have to the land. Otherwise, we're the colonizers. Otherwise, all those things are true. So
we've talked in the past about that. I deeply disagree with you on that, and I deeply reject or I find it very abrasive, right? This notion that life is not enough, that that being a nation and being born here and living the culture with the language that I was born with and the people that I grew up with, that this by itself is considered this hollow, empty thing by the thinkers of the religious Zionism, at least of Kook that you were citing.
I don't know if that's fair to say, like, because you're going to the idea again, like I'm looking at like this hollow shell. I'm not looking at it as a hollow shell. I'm looking at it as like this is just another part of the process of our evolution, and it's a needed process for us to have on. The world I'm looking for it to manifest into, I don't see it as oppressive, right? I don't see in the world I'm envisioning, right? There isn't. Democracy still exists in the world I'm in.
I'll say this maybe to bridge. I don't feel a personal objection to the idea that that my own life is a life in which I have to take on as much responsibility as I possibly can to shine as bright a light as I can to, in whatever fields I could excel in, right? I don't, the clash between us I believe, comes when it's the more national orientation and the way in which this national orientation needs to be not even informed, but actually defined by the
Religious text.
religious texts and religious views and perceptions. I find that to be yeah.
Religious texts, yes. How they're perceived and how they're interpreted, that's a separate question, right? Like I just said, most of I'm giving you like a very practical example, right? Judaism has a mechanism where I could take all the laws in Israel right now, call them something called takanat kahal, and now they're part of the Jewish law. That's it. Dunzos. Like the Sanhedrin could come and say, we are taking on the democratic system. And this is always the question about Jewish and democratic, like what's first? I'm with you that if, and this is, we've discussed in the past, but like if the undergirding elements need to be religious, right? If religion is defined the way I see narrow religious people expressing themselves, then you're right. That's terrifying. I'm terrified about that as well. That's bad news bears. It's horrible if that happens. And I would. This is difficult for me because these, of course, are my brothers and sisters. However, in Israel right now, because of the war, there was a very big tension, which already existed, but somehow was not somehow, many reasons why, but there was a certain status quo where the ultra-Orthodox, a majority of them, do not enlist into the army. And during the wars right now, when obviously we were losing many of our young women and men in this country due to war, there was a hope that our brothers and sisters would join in because of this seemingly existential threat. And the response was extremely disappointing. Now, if I'm coming and I'm selling this story right now, if I'm coming and I'm selling the story of like, we're all together, we got to be united, things like that. Or sorry, I'm selling the story that I wanted there to be this religious flavor. I needed to be emphasized, excuse me. Why would anyone want to have that emphasized when it's sharing a story with someone that, like, in such a moment when the war exists, already doesn't see itself related to its other citizens, brothers and sisters living in the land? Again, that creates a tremendous amount of mistrust and tremendous amount of suspicion, and it's very difficult because and this is part of Gilad me saying like there's a sense of urgency, which is it's not only to express like what I just expressed right now, which I think like we're in like messianic times, which is like exciting at a certain level, right? But like I said, nerve-wracking. Also internally, right? Like, and this is something that I do in my little 4 cubits of responsibility. In my I chose to move to a neighborhood which is a seemingly quite diverse neighborhood with regards to the spectrum of religiosity on it, from secular to ultra orthodox, and I give classes over there, and I speak about a language of a Torah that is I don't want to use the word that it's progressive or it's like kumbayash, but like what I believe are real sources and real interpretations that allow us to have a much different view of how we are experiencing religion and the operating system that we're working with. One which I think would not be as terrifying or would not read doom and gloom. I also want to just say one more point, that even if all that was true and Gilad was saying, Chazi, you know what? I love what you're saying, and forget Gilad for a moment. In Israel right now, I read somewhere an article, I think there's between a 25 to 30% uptick or surge in like religious connection or in Israel since the war. And I look at that as like, again, like I look at that for I see that as like a messianic data point. It's amazing. However, um, there are people in power in Israel, right? And that's where it becomes also very problematic. And those people in power who are religiously driven, right, are not simpatico with, I would say, the population and the people. Now, Gilad, you could argue like, then why do they keep on voting for those people? My point being that even if I created this better understanding, so to speak, there's still the issue of who's wielding power, who's making these decisions ultimately. So in our current state in Israel, and this is a sense of urgency, you have a very, very problematic of combination of religion and state, or church and state in Israel, one which I think needs to be abolished. I would like for that connection to emerge ground bottom up, that people want to take on that responsibility because of their strong sense of Jewish identity. Being forced on from the top is not, it's not bearing fruits. Vincent, Nick, sorry, welcome.
May I offer some advice for how I think the religious should speak with secular language?
I'm sorry?
May I offer some advice that I think might be constructive here?
Of course, Kirk.
So one of the things I think maybe the religious might want to do in order to appeal to secular is by doing sort of a Nietzschean genealogy of secular values that go back to Judaism, which is most secular Israelis value peace and human rights and even liberal democracy and capitalism. And guess what? All of these things have precedent, as far as I can tell, in the Torah, with the idea that people are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, that people have dignity, and so you should not harm the other, that cooperation and voluntary trade and all the things that many secular people value all ultimately have this biblical root. And this genealogy of morals, so to speak, might be useful in the context of Judaism by showing how speaking to secular Israelis and saying that their values are not so different from the religious people's values. It's just using different language.
So first of all, I appreciate the recommendation. I would argue that is being done. Gilad is an example of someone that went before the army and after high school, right? You went to Mechina, and I would assume, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that those kind of conversations were discussed as well, right? We're showing you that, like, the roots of Jewish history, how it affected culture, obviously affecting Christianity and affected Islam, right? So, like, I very much like to talk about how we say in the Bible that every knee will bend and every tongue shall swear, like, right? Billions of the world's population is already in some state in that kind of mindset. I don't know though if that would help, Kirk, because what many people have, again, a problem with is not that they don't recognize. It's really two issues. Three. There is a level of ignorance, sure. Secondly, even those that are aware, there's still an issue with, that's great that these values are coming from Judaism. However, how current Judaism seemingly is manifesting itself seems to be, in many cases, in conflict with those values. Sometimes that's true because it's not being practiced the right way. Sometimes it's not true because you need to do a better understanding of what those values mean. And lastly, there's the issue of the commandments and the level of observance as well, right? Which that demands a serious toll. Now, I would argue that that requirement, that specification is I don't know how needed that is, and it could be in the past that the finger waving, do this or God's going to do X, might have worked. That is not the discussion we are supposed to be having with people today. There needs to be a much better understanding of a wider spectrum, much more tolerance, much more being humble and understanding that there are, while Orthodox Judaism, which I participate in, I believe this is the most proper operating system. It itself is flawed because it itself has developed over 2,000 years in exile, and it's only supposed to actually. So all of us are now are supposed to put down our original toolkit embrace obviously our tradition and humbly and honestly move into a path of redefining ourselves, understanding our past. So that could look like there are things that we could be more stringent about, and there's things that we could be potentially more liberal and open about. Not because we're being more dismissive or we're being more understanding, more because there's a level of elevation, there's a level of understanding, there's a level of evolution itself that happened. Of course, you would have many Orthodox people that would champion this and say, right, but we do not have the authority to make those moves. Only when the Sanhedrin comes in does someone actually have an authority to do such a move. So what I've been doing is asking people I speak to, and ask them, can you give me your short list for this Sanhedrin? And one of the prerequisites are any rabbi that would say, I won't sit with that rabbi, probably can't be on that list. And I'm challenging people to even comprehend what would it even look like to agree on leaders that you would trust would even be able to have the wherewithal, the wisdom, the nuanced understanding to even make such moves. So there's a lot about this which has to do with what is it that we want and what is it that we want to manifest in. And anyone, I believe, that is holding on to Torah, they are terrified because they want to maintain the tradition in such a way where like they have ossified. And when you are literally living in a land that's redefining itself, to come and say like, no, I want to bring exile and now implant it and let it grow within the country, that's a model that's never going to work. It is indeed scary to see something manifest into something new. And that's why in my vision, it's only complete if Gilad is there holding hands with me. We actually don't have to be holding hands. I guess we could just be standing side by side. He could be on my shoulders. I could be on his shoulders. We'll decide, I guess, at the time what's the preferred way.
I think we should be doing like cheerleaders pyramid.
There you go. That's what Messiah's accepting. He's coming in. Hey, okay, and everyone immediately jumps up. The whole world turns into this beautiful,
very large pyramid of cheerleaders.
Nicholas, I don't know how much of this you've heard so far, because now we've gone into a free-flowing conversation.
Yeah, I watched the first part where you were talking about, or you were like reading the meeting to go through. But it's interesting you guys are talking about this because I recently went to a talk about like Christianity in government, and he gave a bit of a history as to like governments all throughout the ancient world used to be inspired by the divine, how like they would say like, oh, we have our power because this divine person gave it to us. Like you have like Athens, for example, like named after Athena. And so like that was common amongst the ancient world. And then over time you have like during the Enlightenment period, that separation of state in like religion, where the Enlightenment thinkers were very like logical and like, oh, we can, derive what's the common good from just like pure logic. And they also wanted to be like very religion neutral, where anyone can like choose their religion. They didn't want to like force religion on anyone. But like over time, like I don't know if you agree with this, but like the guy that gave the talk said there's really no such thing as neutrality. Like once you sort of separate the state and church in society, that religion aspect sort of starts to die out, and we've seen that over time. And so yeah, it's interesting how a lot of people now are wanting to become religious. He also said how like in the past a lot of governments were much more monarchical, and you see that like throughout the Hebrew scriptures, and it's really like more dependent on how, I guess, like holy the main person at the top is. Because like you were talking about how when you have like these big systems which governments are built on now, because I guess people don't want to live or die based on the actions of one person. We've built these super large systems that are very slow to change and are designed to be slow on purpose. I don't know, maybe going back to like that monarchical structure and then kind of hoping that that person at the top is holy might be a way to go. It's seemingly unlikely, but definitely having more like actually religious people in government would be a great start.
First of all, thank you for sharing that with us. Doug Wilson talks about this also a lot. Trying to bring in like national Christian nationalism, but it's not about one guy on top, because really there's a few systems in play in Judaism. There's the monarchy, there's the king, right, who has to have with him at all times a little Torah scroll. When I was a little kid, my dad drew this picture of like him having like this little one on his hand, so to speak, like that he carries with him at all time. But the idea is that he needs to be someone that understands that even the crown is sitting on top of this Torah, and the Torah is supposed to be with him. He has to have this dynamic Torah that is allowing him to sort of view the world through that prism. Then you have the oligarchy, which is the Sanhedrin, right? They self-appoint themselves. You then have the clergy, which is the priests, and you then have the anarchist, which is the prophet, right? He levels things sometimes. If the king's out of whack, the prophet has to go in and call him out. So if you have all these separations, this early version of separation of powers, if you have all these powers working properly and doing it in the name of God, right? So then you have all these processes sort of running through, and you have these checks and balances, assuming everyone is oriented properly. Obviously, that's difficult to do, but we've seen that system in the past get corrupted, right? With the Hasmoneans, we see King Saul, like I mentioned earlier in the talk, right? He doesn't complete the mission at the end of the day, and that leads to really, it's horrible even to read that scene when he grabs onto Saul's coat and it rips, and Saul tells him like God has ripped the kingdom away from you. So I get choked up even really thinking about that moment. So yes, there is a sense of, we are looking for some sort of direction. We are looking for leadership. And this is again also what I was talking about with Gilad, which is like when you come back to look at Israel, you're going to be playing like these epic war games right now that are global, have global ramifications. And then you look at your leaders and you're like, has to be like a joke, right? Is this actually happening? You see what's also even going on like inside America, and like it's obviously very, very difficult. So people wanting to go back to like a system, a different system isn't too surprising. However, of course, people are terrified also of theocracies and fascistic powers taking over. So it's difficult. It's difficult to balance that. But I think that is something that, again, this also has to do with what a Jewish state looks like and what a halachic, we were talking about this earlier, how these things actually manifest. I think there's like a lot of boogeymen when people talk about that, like to say like, oh, Israel wants to turn into Haran, based like to Iran, and like put on burqas on people. And like, that's like a very ignorant statement and very far away from, let's say, what I truly believe Judaism teaches and what the sages teach. There are, of course, interpretations and rabbis that, like again, I say they are a reaction to modernity, and now they have a lot of political powers. Please.
I think the issue is, Jacob also talks about it, but it's quite common. I think the way he said it is in Muslim countries, people who are Muslim are the silent ones. Right, like the issue is not the you want to put burqas on people. The issue is what power dynamics do in this combination, in this unholy joining of church and state. And
why unholy?
I think I use unholy like very deliberately here, and I think Leibowitz gave that gave his argument for it, which I think is apt. He said, I would like to separate religion from state, not in order to save the state from the influence of religion, but to rescue religion from the clutches of politics and the state. And
I agree with that.
That's the sense, like when you specifically discuss the fear that people have. It's not that Chezi or the rabbi in the Orthodox place or the person with the phylactery stand, that they're gonna uh, just decide to go like that. They're actually, scheming behind the scenes to put burqas or shavisas on everyone. But these I didn't like the claims like, oh, like we're going to be Iran. It's you have to see it and everything. The thing that it's pointing to is that this is a pretension that like we should be extremely careful with. Like this is a dynamic that plays out the way it plays out, and it has played out very badly in many examples we can look at. So, I
Does,
yeah,
does that mean it's not possible at all?
I mean, you could ask this about every political system or setup, right? Like you could ask whether it's possible to have communism at all. You could ask whether it's possible to have
It was never truly tried, right?
yeah, like we've never truly tried. That's the sort of sense, as I said before, that I'm getting when Chazi is discussing, and like when I talk about that dynamics, the thing about generally messianic or apocalyptic or eschatonic thinking is that it's not very responsive to the facts on the ground, and that's a part of what I was trying to bring up with Chazi earlier, which is like, so like the positive prophecy has to come, and there's a prophecy that there won't, like there's this idea of not a third, won't be a third exile. And for me, I want to be able to look at, for instance, this war with Iran and have a grounded notion of what did we set out to do, what have we managed to achieve, and at what cost, and whether the decisions were made with the right tools, with the in the proper procedures, etc. And this is one dynamic where it goes like, this is something that Avi Sagi was speaking about, Professor Avi Sagi, that the issue with like messianic thinking is that redemption doesn't go backwards. Like kima, as you say, but like there's something, especially with the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War after that, that really sort of shifted the religious view among religious Zionism to this kind of like, no, there's something we have to change dramatically. Like if the world is behaving this way, it must mean we're not following like the prophecy the right way. And that tendency is terrifying to me.
I understand, but my vision of it is of 2,000 years. I can't just focus on like one element that's happening. My whole point is that, and I was saying that this is a pattern that repeats itself. There's exiles and we fall down. These processes are invisible in many cases. I can't tell you, right? Like my focus right now is on the war, which is my feeling more is that there's a sense over here about like when I listen to the messages, and you could be like, well, that's propaganda, right? Of liberating the people of Iran. That to me is the mission. And I was saying, there's this whole element of like the existential threat. They're going to shoot at us, things like that. I think you and
I would say, like, let's say where I agree with you, and I said this on the stream with Jacob. I would say this. I think I'm terrified that if regime change happens in Iran, then these demons that I see in Israel would erupt in a way that would be catastrophic. But even when I see that, and this is where we might agree, I firmly believe that the harm that Israel has done and could do in that theoretical situation is still less significantly, like by orders of magnitude, than what the Islamic regime in the Islamic Republic's regime in Iran has been doing. And so I would
The
say,
lesser of greater evils.
what?
Saying it's like the lesser of greater evils. I understand that, like, even if that had to
No,
happen,
that's not what I'm saying. I was gonna say this. Even if, like, I would prefer a future in which the Iranian people are liberated, and my life is negatively impacted by this, because I don't. And you could say this is like my own messianic soul speaking, if
right?
you wish, right? But like that is a sense that I have, um, where I think like there is, first of all, like 90 million people living there, and there's all of the evil that this regime has been promoting worldwide, that has affected millions more, if not tens or hundreds of millions more around the world negatively. So I feel like there is something there that I feel like is like worth pursuing, and worth even like the personal pain that might be inflicted from that. What I'm not sure at the moment, and I think no one is sure, is like whether that's actually even in the cards, right? Like I really, I'm. It's a very clearly historical moment, like these protests and the war and everything. Like what would be, it's unclear, but yeah, I don't know. If it's possible, I think it would be you know an amazing boon to the world, as much as it might be.
Now you're speaking like a prophet.
All right.
I mean that's what I'm hoping for, right? Hence the sense of urgency. The sense of urgency is because there's an opportunity to be marvelous, and there's a high chance of us not doing that. And you're right, like in your case of like, even then it's still better. Great, we both agree with that. There shouldn't be like horrible murder in Iran. But I don't want to settle there, right? I don't want to settle. I don't want it to be that that terrifying vision you have of now this bringing into like some sort of messianic. It's not that I don't want a messianic high, because I'm on a messianic high, because I think we're in messianic times. I'm with you that kind of energy could completely be misused and could lead to horrible devastation. So it totally makes sense why someone would be nervous. Do you mind actually if I share, since we're reading stuff over here, I'm going to share a vision of a Jewish state, because we're talking about, and I think Nick also was asking, is it even possible? So I believe it is, but I think we need to clear out some definitions. So I want to go through this quickly, and at any point, of course, anyone could feel like they could bust out. No, I don't want to add this to stage. I want to stop screen, and now I want to present, share screen, window, share.
I don't know too much about the current Israeli government. Is it like mainly secular?
It is mainly secular. It's well, we're actually going to get into that right now.
Okay.
Buckle up. Okay. And so, what is a halachic state? In order to dispel the confusion surrounding this issue, one that unfortunately very few have studied in depth. It is necessary to distinguish between three different concepts. Right when I write over here, unfortunately, very few have studied in depth. This is also a dig at many people that represent Judaism, because I feel like, well, I also am aware of what the Torah they're studying in their study holes, and sometimes its limitations as well. Three different concepts: a Jewish state, our current reality; a religious state; an undesirable model; and halachic state, which is the subject of the present discussion. A Jewish state. A Jewish state is the state of the Jewish people. That is the state of Israel. It is hardly need to be stated that Israel was established in the resolution of the Jewish people to the right of the land of Israel and expressed in the Declaration of Independence. The precise content of this right remains open to debate, and the declaration itself contains several definitions, perhaps even contradictory ones, regarding this meaning. The Jewish character of the state is also anchored in the law of return and in several basic laws, particularly in the national state law. Since the identity Jewish functions both as a national identity and as a religious identity, in Israel's official population registry, it follows that the Jewish character of the state includes certain elements derived from the Jewish tradition. For example, the designation of Shabbat as the official day of rest and Hebrew as the national language. The Jewish people's right to state does not depend on the state being democratic. Nevertheless, the Jewish people living in Zion decided that the governmental system of the state would be democratic, and its decision is also embedded in Israel's basic law. However, it's important to distinguish between the essence of the state and the form of government. Even if we cherish the formula of a Jewish democracy, these two components represent different categories. Jewishness is the essence of the state, democracy, the method of governance. Based on the Jewish character of the state, a certain degree of Jewish law has already entered public life and cultural expression in Israel. This is answering eunuch. The well-known status quo arrangements regarding religion emerged from this reality, as did a proposal of social covenants that respect this public sphere, such as the Gabison Medan covenant. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but Gilad knows what I mean by that. The delicate balance between Jewish and democratic is what allows a shared social contract for Israeli society to exist, even if tensions occasionally appear. Therefore, if we wish to preserve the life and stability, we should not abolish the defining characteristics of Israel as both Jewish and democratic. Okay, so far, so good. And then we have to ask, what is a religious state? A religious state is a political entity that forces religious ways of life upon its citizens. This system exists in certain Muslim countries, such as Iran, hopefully not soon, Saudi Arabia, and Afghanistan. In some ideological dictatorships, such as China, North Korea, Vietnam, and Cuba. There is a similar imposition of ideology, communism, upon the individual. Well, there's a similar imposition of ideology, communism upon the individual. Well, this is not technically a religious state. Its structure resembles one in the way it imposes doctrine upon society. Certain Western countries also exhibit limited form of coercion, such as the wearing of veil in public spaces, circumcision, Jewish ritual slaughter. In general, however, coercive ideological systems are rejected by most countries of the world. It is important to note that Jewish law itself does not enforce religious behavior upon the individual. Again, I'm going to note that again. Jewish law itself does not enforce religious behavior upon the individual. This is evident to anyone who has studied the relevant Talmudic and halakhic sources. All students of Halakha know that the enforcement mechanism mentioned in the Bible and the rabbinic literature were effectually neutralized by the rabbinic tradition itself. The legal conditions required to implement such punishments were defined so strictly that their practical implication became virtually impossible, even under the optimal circumstances of functioning Sanhedrin. As is stated in the Mishnah Makot, this is the tractate Makot in the Talmud, a court that executed once in 70 years was already considered destructive. For this reason, once every 70 years. For this reason, a religious state is not on the agenda for the Jewish law. See Grota Raya, this is Rabbi Cook. Even if most of the citizens were religious, this is still not something we desire. Therefore, the fear held by many liberals that Israel could become a coercive religious state is largely misplaced and could be dispelled. What is halakha? By the way, I'm pointing this out. Unfortunately, there are many secular Jews and religious Jews that believe this. And that's why the fear is real, because there are people in political power that would like to impose the thing that I'm saying doesn't exist and is not what ultimately the Jewish vision. What is a halachic state? A halachic state is a state that recognizes Jewish law as principled normative framework of legislation. To understand what this means, one should study the monumental work of the former Deputy President of Israel Supreme Court, Professor Menachem Alon, titled Jewish Law. This formulation of Jewish law within modern legal tools has been gradually developed by the Department of Jewish Law and Israel Ministry of Justice, headed by Rabbi Professor Nachum Rackover and other leading scholars. Just as Jewish people have returned to their land, their language, their political independence, so too is it appropriate that they return to their own legal tradition, a rich jurisprudential heritage of legal rulings developed over centuries, rather than relying exclusively on remnants of Ottoman and British mandate law. Two central elements are relevant here. The source of sovereignty. One of the recurring questions in legal theory concerns the source of sovereign authority. The modern state there is an inherent difficulty in defining the source. Typically, we say the people are the sovereign, and they grant authority to their elected representatives. In Israel, the Knesset is the sovereign legislative is the sovereign legislative authority elected by the public. It grants legal legitimacy, the not yet constitutional legitimacy, because we don't have a constitution, to the executive and judicial branches. While theoretically the Knesset could abolish the other branches, the principle of separation of powers prevents such a scenario. And this is obviously an issue that Gilad and I were talking about with regards to the judicial reform as well. Is it going to change this balance? Yet there's a deeper philosophical problem. When the state becomes the ultimate sovereign, the state effectively replaces God. This concern explains the opposition of certain groups, such as the Satmar Hasidim, which Jacob sometimes discusses. To the entire idea of the Jewish state, In their view, sovereign Jewish state constitutes rebellion against the true sovereign, the creator of the world.
Okay.
Hit me.
I have a question related to this.
Yes.
So you're implying that the reason the Satmar Hasidim opposed the state of Israel is because they view it as a rebellion against the creator?
It's very close actually to Zionism, right? Like they're down for a state. They just believe that it can't happen, like happening through a secular thing. You just replace God.
Okay, but I thought that's because of the three oaths specifically.
Yeah, well, again, there's the three oaths. Three oaths that if you want, we could do a separate class on the three oaths, discussion on the three oaths. However, ultimately, they're saying those three oaths, right? The things that we can't come, all those things happened by this group of people right now that is building a state and is saying, like, as in the Satmar Hasidim would also like there to be a state. They just feel like it's premature. They feel like we don't have the authority to do it, and people taking that authority ultimately. Then sorry about that. Ultimately, then
I just want to cut in just to say I'm gonna try to get some sleep before the next rocket alarm.
Sure, do your thing.
All right. Good night, everyone.
One second.
Good night to Gilad.
Good night, Gilad. We love you.
Where does he live?
Gilad lives in Israel.
Okay.
As well. So, although this opinion is not accepted by most rabbinic authorities, it is nevertheless contains a warning about human arrogance when humans place themselves in the position of God. In the halachic state, this problem is resolved. The ultimate sovereign is the creator, who becomes the source of authority for the state and all its institutions, including democratic governance, legislation,
How would
authority.
that work?
Yes.
How would that work though? Because like God works through people and he appoints people to rule for him. It's not like he's like we all have our free will. It's not like he's just, commanding us like puppets on strings.
You're right. So he's not commanding us. That's why I'm saying if we put halacha, if we put God's word at the source of the authority, then everything downstream from there is ultimately happening through sort of God's law, right? So the second issue concerns, we'll get into that as well. The second issue concerns the relation between parliamentary legislation and halacha, right? How do you actually do this? If Jewish law is recognized as legally authoritative, then halacha can recognize Knesset legislation as takanat kahal, communal legislation. This concept allows halacha to grant binding authority to the state law, far beyond the classic halachic principle of dina de malchuta dina, the law of the kingdom is the law. Right now, many people are saying, like, listen, when we're in America, when we're this, we have to keep the law over there, even though it's a secular law, because the law of the land is that's what we work with. But that's a secular law that we're adapting, and that's why there's many there's many Orthodox Jews that won't go to court systems because they're ultimately using a secular court system and a secular authority, and that's why they don't accept it. Here, what we're saying is the move would be, once I have the authority recognizing that its source is halacha, then I'm not worried about grandfathering in all these quote unquote secular laws through now the halachic system. Now they all get the stamp of the Jewish approval. This would solve a long-standing tension of observant Jews who view secular courts as courts of non-Jewish law, which halacha traditionally discourages Jews from using. How would such a state function? In a halachic state, the Knesset, the government, the Supreme Court, and the state comptroller would all continue to function exactly as they do today. However, they would be subordinate to a constitution that recognizes halacha as the highest normative standard of legislation. To implement this system, a supreme constitutional body would be established, similar to France Constitutional Council or constitutional courts in other countries. This body would be able to invalidate government or parliamentary discussions that contradict the Constitution or the foundational values of the society. This institution would resemble the ancient Sanhedrin, but its legitimacy would be from the public consensus through democratic mechanisms. See, so we're taking what I was saying earlier with an oligarchy, where we see that system wouldn't work anymore. We have to obviously appoint these people, but now we're allowing these people with their understanding of the source, the true source of sovereignty. Individual freedoms. A halachic state does not dictate the form of government, which remains subject to the decision of the people. As the Netziv says over here, as I mentioned earlier, when you come to the land and you see a king. Individual freedoms will remain intact, including freedom of speech, freedom of culture, freedom of religion, and did I skip that part? Wait, no, sorry. Okay. And freedom from religion. For example, a person will remain free to eat non-kosher food, violate the Shabbat, dress as they chose, express their beliefs. However, public recognition of certain norms, such as redefining marriage, may not necessarily receive official legal endorsement if they contradict the cultural values of the Jewish people. Yes, okay. Kurt, go ahead.
So I wonder, would this affect abortion rights at all? Because in my understanding, we've talked about this before, that there are certain interpretations of Judaism. For example, my understanding is Moshe Feinstein's position that basically say that unless there's a threat to the life of the mother, abortion rights are not permitted because of various reasons. And so would this affect abortion rights at all?
Of course. So this would be decided already by this council, though. I mean, or again, the essence is Jewishness, and our legal system is that of the halacha. Now, of course, married together with all, the new developments we have in science and understanding and research out there. However, this council will actually have to decide. Now, this council would have the authority to say it doesn't matter that Moshe Feinstein, this great rabbi, said X, right? We disagree with him. We don't agree with him. Their authority, this is the authority we're also all waiting for. Right? We're waiting for authority that can actually start binding on earth like it is in heaven. We just don't have that right now because it's bifurcated, right? We have all these, and that's why it's okay for there to be, there's different versions of this expression. However, of course, this would be part of these certain norms that are inside. Now, when I'm saying eating not kosher or dress as they choose, right? This is because how it always was in the land, in the first temple and the second temple, right? People were still allowed to express their beliefs, right? People were still allowed to violate the Shabbat. And like I said, the court system, even though the Torah says if you violate the Shabbat, it's the death penalty, we see the courts didn't do that at the end of the day, right? There was an understanding of the people, where they are, the reasons behind that. Was he actually warned? Did he fully understand? I was learning with someone about sort of heresy in today's day and age. And Maimonides comes out pretty intensely against heretics, right? He says anyone that is a heretic, basically, like, you could hate him, you don't have to, you could hurt him. He doesn't have a part in the world, a portion of the world to come that even includes the 13 attributes of God. Yet we clearly know of other rabbis that reject some of these attributes, that the 13 principles that, sorry, not the attribute of God, the 13 principles of faith that Maimonides brings in. And Maimonides himself has interpretations of, even if someone rejects God, we need to give him this. We need to be understanding of his position. Maybe he was taught improperly. Maybe when he read the information, he wasn't reading it properly. So we really do everything we can before we start lambasting people. The Declaration of Independence, the desired state. I believe that a halachic state in the form described above could eventually gain a broad support among the Israeli public. This requires explaining that does not mean a coercive religious state, but rather a system deeply rooted in values expressed in Israel's Declaration of Independence. The declaration states, this is the current declaration that we have, states, the Jewish people right to the state derives from their spiritual and historical connection to the land. The state was founded with the trust in the rock of Israel. That is the name of God. The state will be, Jacob likes talking about how secular Israel is. But again, they talk about their spiritual and historical connection to the land. That is not secular. The trust in the rock of Israel. That is not secular. The state will be based on freedom, justice, and peace according to the vision of the prophets of Israel. That is not secular. The state will guarantee complete equality of rights to all citizens, regardless of religion, race, and gender, which is also how the Jewish people and the Jewish Torah and the Torah tells us to participate, yes, and behave. Yes, Kurt.
If I may push back a little bit on this view,
Sure.
I've heard secular Israelis, for example, the guy I linked a while back, Zarathustra Serpent is his name on YouTube. He basically explains that this idea of Israel, like looking back to the prophets, it's in a national, cultural, and historical sense of being Jewish. But just because you nationally gain inspiration from other members of the Jewish nation does not necessarily mean it has religious significance.
He could say that until tomorrow. Who are these prophets? What are they prophesizing? Like, you can't drop this 2,000-year tradition that you have and be like, that's nice, that's cultural. Like, now there's some people that want to say that. I'm saying it's why, like, sort of, we reject in the Jordan Peterson sphere, we reject atheists in a certain sense, because like it's not real. You could be saying that if you want to be saying that, but like the reality is, and this is why I talk about this prophetic times that we're in, right? Like, these wars are emerging. These people are getting involved. Again, 1948 was a theological smack in the face to our Muslim brothers and sisters, and to our Christian brothers and sisters as well. And that is something that we obviously all still need to contend with. These principles can serve as a shared foundation. We're almost done, Gilad. For the Jewish democratic state rooted in Jewish law. Such a state would be far removed from the religious dictatorship many fear. We already have a Jewish state today. We never intended to create a religious state, but a halachic state, in a true sense, is our vision. It is the vision of the state of Israel. Yes, Gilad.
Yeah, I was just putting you on the background while I was getting ready to sleep. What is it that you define secularism as?
What do you mean? It's secular.
You said this is not secular about like the Declaration of Independence, and that just.
Oh, sorry. I was saying what's not secular. I was saying, one second. I was saying these lines in the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, the Declaration of State. The Jewish people's right to state derives from their spiritual and historical connection to the land. It's not a secular statement. The state was founded.
What is not secular about it?
As in, it's not secular as in like your right to the state is not based on a secular system that comes and says because of laws that exist today or because the nation states that exist today, it's because of our spiritual and historical connection to the land. That's why that land is ours. Now, there's obviously another system that includes that we did, right? There's 1948. There's all that secular infrastructure there. But I'm saying this line in the Declaration itself, I don't see it as secular. Sorry, go ahead.
Like, I just don't think you're making a false, like, it's not a false dichotomy. You're making a dichotomy, and you're cutting along a wrong line there. Like, that's not what separates secular and religious thinking, in my view.
I didn't say that. First of all, I didn't say that's all that separates secular and religious thinking. What I was saying is that in this declaration, I wasn't saying that people were opposing. I'm saying already in this declaration, you have religious elements like the Rock of Israel, like freedom.
You're saying like secularism is not derootedness. I don't know like how to say it differently. Secularism, like you said it before, that's a response to modernity. And the fact that you're a secular Jew rather than a rootless individual floating in space doesn't like that's not something that makes it non-secular. Like like these are things that are Jewish, but I wouldn't say that they're, like you kept saying, they're not secular, and I don't see why they're not secular. Like
Well,
what
how
do
are
you
you?
see as the thing that makes them not secular?
Well, again, it's not creating a secular state in the classic Western sense.
It's not a classic, like Israel, we can agree, is not a classic Western country, right? Like there are many ways, like it doesn't even have a constitution, but certainly the Declaration of Independence is unique. It's different. Those are some ways in which it's different. But
Right, but I'm saying there isn't a civic nationalism necessary. There isn't like the will of the people wanted it to be so. That's not what we're saying.
okay, to say that it's not the will of the people, but there's like it, the will of the people, sort of across time. Like that's sort of the idea, right? Like the freedom, justice, and peace according to the vision of the prophets of Israel.
Right? Why is it not John Locke or Rousseau or it's Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos?
Because it's secular Judaism.
What
it's
is
not-
secular? But Judaism, right? Is not just. I'm saying it's not just a culture; it's a religion.
It's not just a culture; it's a religion.
Correct.
And all I would say is this: to my view, right? What separates me from religious Jews, right? Like the thing that makes me secular compared to you is that I don't feel an obligation to Torah and mitzvot, right? I don't feel that the best way for me to live is to follow and to accept the burden of Torah and mitzvot. But the fact that these are the bases of my culture, right? Like that these are texts that are rich and fascinating and run through every inch of the culture that I live in, that my family through generations has been immersed in. That's still there. So I don't see where like that sort of grates me in this separation of like secular and religion is, the seculars.
So first of all, I appreciate that. So let me try to correct this. I would say that again in that portion that I was talking about, the Declaration of Independence, I'd say it's rejecting the state of Israel as merely a secular nation state, right? And I'm saying I believe it's rooting its legitimacy in and the moral vision of the state of Israel in spiritual and a historical identity of the Jewish people.
I would agree with you. Let's say maybe just if we're talking about how to maybe, in my view, kind of phrase it a bit better or more accurately, these are examples of how this declaration is not universalist, right? It is Jewish.
Sure.
I would just say like these are ways in which this is specifically Jewish.
Besides the last point.
Yeah.
What? Besides the last one, the state will guarantee complete equality of rights to all citizens, regardless of religion, race, or gender.
You're saying besides it.
Saying besides that, yes, correct. It's Jewish.
Like, those points in general. That's what I'm saying. That if you want to say like, I don't know, it's not maybe too interesting for the others, but to me it was specifically like, I don't think that perception of, or that implicit perception of secularism that you were.
So maybe I'll say it differently, because I was also mentioning this sort of in the context of, let's say, Jacob, who comes and says like, I'm looking at this as already, Israel is already, I'm saying, like when he looks at Israel, like Ben Gurion and Herzl are, these secular people that care nothing about Judaism. I would say like already in our declaration already seeing these words used and these ideas show up in the declaration rejects that idea that Jacob is bringing, that like, that this is completely secular. I see this as like a rejection of that.
No, okay. I will leave you to it. I would just say that I think it's a very
Before,
common way to frame secularism, which I think is just not true to most secular Jews that I know.
yeah,
Like,
before you go, Gilad, I do have a question for you. Which is, so Hezi was mentioning this notion of time within Judaism as like we anticipate the future and it's evolving. Do you think that this has any implications as a physicist for like views of retrocausality where the future can influence the past?
oof, that's just one last question just before you go to sleep.
One
And
last
you
question.
answer,
Prove the universe
answer
to
that,
me,
like,
Neil.
let's just go for retro causality about. Um, I guess the short answer is that's not something I ever thought about. Certainly not in that context.
Not
And
cool, Eli.
yeah, and I don't really ascribe to retrocausality as like a physical reality as much as a mathematical convenience. Like
Okay,
the only, yeah,
I asked because I heard that there's like the Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory where something which I heard is like time symmetric, but I don't know if you
Of
know anything
course.
about that.
Classic theory.
I know enough about like the what's it called? There's something called the two vector state function or something.
Two-state vector formalism.
Two-state vector formalism, right? Like there's every quantum state has a state vector from the future and a state vector from the past, and they both influence it. But you only use it in cases where you've done the experiment. The past happened, the future happened. Now you're looking at it, and then you're formalizing it. And Yaakov Aharonov does believe in this the future affecting the past, but that's an interpretation, and I personally don't ascribe to it. I think it's I don't know. I'm not that like taken by thinking about it, since it's not falsifiable or testable. It doesn't
Yeah.
like.
Well, a lot of theoretical physics is not very Popperian in the sense of like a lot of it is mathematical formalism that is not easily testable or like stuff like that. I mean, it's because you're dealing with such complex.
I'm gonna have to
We're
cut
going
you
to
off
test
because
out this
really,
theory, Eli. We're going to test out your sleeping theory right now.
yeah,
Everyone's
exactly.
gonna-
We really should go to sleep.
And
But
we'll see you wake up in the morning.
Good night,
Yeah.
Gilad.
Buddy. Stay
not
safe.
everyone.
Pardon me for the tangent. Just
No.
curious for Gilad's perspective on that. But
Kevin,
I really,
sorry, Kevin. Nick, I want to just let you know, like what you're hearing over here. I'm just going to clarify it again. Jacob very much rejects a lot of what I'm saying. I know you chill with Jacob a lot. While I'll say that Jacob definitely sees me as an Orthodox Jew, and he respects me very much. I think he thinks a lot of these ideas are gobbledygook and dangerous in their own way. I don't believe Jacob wouldn't refute any of the sources I've mentioned or things like that. So I'm not speaking out of school. Just our interpretations are very different. And as I said it, I believe we have, and this relates to the Song of Songs parable, but I believe that my beloved is knocking on the door. I have an opportunity to date the best looking girl in town, and I cannot risk being late to that date. And I believe Jacob and the diaspora Jews are risking being late to that date, which to me is nutsos. But don't worry, Vincent. Redemption is close. And guess what? There's room for everyone. It's a house of prayer for all nations.
Yeah, no, this is interesting stuff because I've heard a lot of people, especially spiritual people, be like, "Oh, like, don't really worry about what's happening on Earth because our home is not on Earth." But like you said, like we're trying to bring heaven to Earth.
Listen, heaven. The way there's two different concepts. We won't get too deep into this, but there's the world to come, one concept, and then there's when people die, they go to heaven, so to speak, right? Now, heaven, as we see, or Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, right, which sometimes gets replaced with heaven. The Garden of Eden, the way the Torah explains it, if you're looking at Genesis as not just allegorical, which there's also Jewish authorities that claim that. But if you're looking at it as an actual event, right, that garden is on earth. We just get rejected from it, but that's happening here. And even Gehenna, right? It's actually a place called Gai Ben Hinnom, the Valley of Hinnom. And that's where people that were participating in idolatry and witchcraft were kicked out of the city of Jerusalem, and they were down in this valley. Also a place that's here. So there's a true sense where heaven and hell is something that we create in this reality over here and what we do with our life. You touch fire, you get burnt. What that means towards the world to come, meaning when we all have an elevated and a phase shift consciousness of how we are perceiving the world and the operating system we're playing with, then who knows? Who knows what will be? But we very much, we are in a co-creation relationship with God here.
Yeah,
Meaning-
that aligns
Yeah.
with Orthodox Christianity, how like the whole world will be transformed. Like it's not just like the material world will be replaced by spiritual, but like everything will be transformed and I guess demonized, and how humans will be in like good relationship with the animals, just how Adam was in good relationship with.
Yeah, that's
We'll be
that's-
vegetarian because we won't be killing animals, and
that is an idea that is echoed in Rabbi Cook's work as well, called the Vision of Vegetarianism. And there's another Rabbi Ramchal who talks about everything phase shifts, right? Like all humanity phase shifts. So we all level up, and animals level up as well. I play with this idea of like, using LLMs right now. They managed, last time I saw this article was they managed to, I think like parrots have like 32 words that they use, and like dolphins and whales all speak 2 different languages. They speak like their own dolphin and whale language, and they also speak like a universal dolphin whale hybrid, so they could sort of connect with each other. So there's also a sense of, as this gets into a whole other discussion of where AI relates to this, but and how that relates also to the messianic vision. But the idea is understanding animals better and potentially not eating animals anymore. And that's a whole discussion about like, what about the sacrifices in the temple, how that work? Will Maimonides sort of speaks about how, the sacrifices were done because of cultural reasons, and they're sort of to wean us off of idolatry. But today it's not necessary anymore, right? It's not called a temple anymore. It's called the house of prayer for all nations. So maybe prayer replaces that, and that's not necessary anymore. However, for those who say they want a hybrid, saying like, yes, everyone will be vegetarian, also because we could, print food and like all different technologies, which will allow us to basically like not even just from a moral perspective, right? Even though I think like the rise of PETA and things like that those are little elements of like we said earlier, the names of Messiah, like the fallen Messiah, right? That's an idea that the movement itself has a messianic element to it. It itself is a failed shell of that happening, right? Communism brought us social justice. It itself didn't work out though. So these are divine sparks that we're taking. So even from PETA, we can understand that there's something true about the fact that we don't want to be like mass farming cow. Like it's just nuts what we're doing right now just because kids want to eat burgers, right? It's out of control. So if I could print that out right now and I could avoid that, that's amazing. Now, there's some people that want to go back to, maybe we'll find this mix of like, we'll be vegetarian. However, in the temple, there is still some sacrifices. So there is a biblical story, and there's something even a little more contemporary that I like to fuse together. There's a biblical midrash. Well, there's the famous story of Elijah on the mountain of Carmel, right? And there's the false prophets of Baal, and he decides to do this test. Right? Who does God respect? And we're gonna build 2 separate altars, and we're gonna put the 2 bulls on them, and whoever has like a fire erupt, right? Then we'll know who God chose. And Elijah pours water all over his, and by the Baal people, it's all dry, and there's someone even underneath there to light a fire to try to cheat. But the Midrash goes and says that they wanted it to be fair, so to speak, so they used 2 bulls, 2 brothers, and they brought them. And the bull that's going to Elijah is all hunky-dory. Great, I'm with Elijah. The bull going to the false prophet starts complaining. He won't move. And they're trying to pull him, and he won't come. So Elijah goes to the bull and prophetically is speaking to it. And he's like saying, like, what's the deal, dude? And the bull says, your bull is dying for a noble cause, right? I'm dying for these false prophets. Why would I do this? So Elijah comes and tells him, he's like, no, even by the rejection of your sacrifice, the fact that they're just going to kill you for no reason, that rejection is still promulgating God's name in the world, right? So by showing them that you're not going to work and mine is going to work, that is still for God's service. And the bull says, okay, I'm bringing this now into the cultural reference. When Joe Rogan or your Native American is hunting the elk and catches it, and there's a whole respectable process going on there, and they try not to harm it, and there's this moment of realizing that now what we truly believe, through eating it, I'm elevating the spirit and essence of this food by making a blessing and recognizing that it's from the land and it's a gift from God and it's going back to you, and the circle of life element. That is, I believe, in a faith shifted reality, something that animals might be understanding, that that's the circle of life that they are honoring and are okay being part of. Being part of a sacrifice to God or being part of a lofty idea, that is a game we're willing to participate in. Making 1 billion chickens just so you could have sunny side ups, that is not a respectful relationship with animals.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, that's a good point. It's just hard to like. I get what you're saying. I don't want to make everything that I say like Christian related, but it's.
You can. You're Christian. That's great. Go to church. Pray.
Yeah, no, it is interesting that it seems like in Christianity that wouldn't really be a problem because like we think of like Jesus as the sacrifice, so like the animals themselves are no longer needed as sacrifice, and they can be like truly themselves in a sense.
Right. So we also believe when the Messiah comes, right, that doesn't, like Maimonides says, like, it's not now that no one sins anymore, right? People could still make mistakes. People could mess up. Obviously, there would be an enlightenment. Hopefully, people could be a lot more aligned. We're looking at a world that's much more oriented, but that doesn't mean that the game's over. The game's over at the world to come, and that why speculate on such things that no eye has ever seen. But fascinating times, my friend. You should buckle up.
I don't know. I don't view now as apocalyptic or maybe messianic as you think it is, because I feel like things on like much larger scales have happened in the recent past, and the world has still.
They were all messianic times. The Rabbi Cook talks about every war. There's messianic energy out there. He calls it Kol Hazamir Higia. It's always a moment for a great change. And those are all little messianic data points, right? Like definitely the Declaration of Independence, that's like, are you kidding me? That's like insane. That's a huge phase shift in humanity. I would say as Jews, that's like we're looking at the world and saying like, welcome to the club, right? Like having that written in a constitution that all men are made equal. The fact that we have like in God we trust and your money, that's just like bonkers, right? Like that's nuts. So all these things are leading toward this moment. And if I look at things accelerating, right? So if I'm looking at 1948 and then 1967, and then where we are right now, the Abraham Accords. So that's like a different pattern that's pushing up. And again, from my perspective, I'm at the tail end of 2,000 years of exile and coming back to the land and seeing the land being fruitful for the first time. These are all real prophecies coming to life as I walk around. When I see verses where say that one day old people will sit and watch kids play in the streets of Jerusalem, that I build homes, parks, and in Jerusalem for people to literally participate in that. Things that wouldn't even, like, no one would even dream of. So these things are like, they're too great for me to ignore. So in that context, now having a war with Iran post October 7 is just like, it's nuts.
Yeah, but in terms of like the whole world becoming Judaized, it seems like that's still a long ways away.
The whole world is not supposed to become Judaized, though. Our being the chosen people, in Hebrew, that word also means chosenness, means what you're capable of. And we have a certain sense of responsibilities and things that we are capable and that we excel at. There's other people in other nations that excel in other things. At the end of days, God also calls Egypt its people as well. Assyria, the craft work of my hands. Right? There are other narratives happening. This is a famous moment in the Torah when we have the story of Balaam the prophet that is a whole story being told that has nothing to do with the Jews. We're being told this whole section that other people are scheming and planning, and there's no Jewish actor in that whole portion. And that we are being reminded, hi Jews, there are other stories and there are other narratives happening. Rabbi Koch often talks about how the divine spark both in Christianity and in Islam, right? Maimonides talks about how Christianity and Islam are all path makers for the Messiah. So there is definitely other stories happening, and we're not looking to Judaize everyone. We are looking ultimately to shine a light to the nations. To be a light onto the nations is for us to model what it looks like all the way from the individual all the way to the body politic as a nation, what that looks like to serve God. And then other nations are welcome to do that as well in their flavor, right? So like, while I do believe in the idea of everyone becoming a Noahide, and we'll use a different idea, we'll call the original name everyone becoming a God-fearer, right? The 7 Noahide laws are the minimum prerequisite. The sky is not the sky's the limit, but I'm not expecting a Christian Noahide to participate, to act like a Buddhist Noahide or a Muslim Noahide. Each one has their own beautiful culture, and I need their story. That is the multifaceted face of God ultimately. I'm there, Jews are there, like I said, we're all invited into this beautiful house that we're building in this world. We are the chimney cleaners. We're not here to Judaize anyone. We're here to make sure that the frequency between us and the transcendent is as clear as possible. We believe in our tradition. I would say Muslims and Christians also believe ultimately in that tradition, right? The sister religion or the mother religion being Judaism, our connection to your connection to the Father, so to speak, that is what we're trying to clarify. In Kabbalistic terms, it's seen as Islam is din, the left hand of God, justice, right? Which comes out very hard, right? Their monotheism is extremely intense. You have on the right-hand side, the right hand of God is Christianity, which is grace ultimately, but it's also grace on steroids. That's right, turn the other cheek. Judaism is called Tiferet. It's the weaving of both of those things together ultimately. And that is the route we're offering to people. But again, it's very important that their language and their uniqueness remains. Judaism, Israel and the nations is like the heart inside the body, right? If each one has its own thing, if my body's made all of hearts, right? In the Judaism world, then that body ceases to function. I need the legs, I need the arms, I need the brain, I need all those elements working together. So that's how we see ourselves. So do I think like we're there? Again, when you tell to me the return of wanting a king, you were talking about earlier, or a turn of Christianity on the rise, that to me is messianic. That to me is a data point. I don't need those Christians now, but like they're more interested in Judaism. I want that more people going to mosque and more people going to church, to me, is the indication of everyone wants to be part of the main event. And that's why when I speak to Muslim Arab friends of mine, I always tell them, and specifically if they're Shiites, like whether it's Mashiach, Messiah, or it's the Mahdi, right? Like, who are we to challenge what Allah says, right? When the main guy comes, we're all going to say yes to whatever he wants. He wants a temple, he wants a mosque. Like, we're not going to deny the messenger of God. So, like, you don't have to worry about it. Right now, we could all pray in the Temple Mount together. I don't need to destroy it. I don't need to blow it up. I remind them that the Caliph Omar built it. It's called Beit al-Mikdash, actually, which is the Hebrew name for the temple. And it was actually made to preserve and respect the foundation stone that is still there. So obviously, I'm not looking into Judaism, everyone, but I'm saying like what you're seeing happening around you, the language that's being used. To me, that means in a world in change. And throw on top of that AI. That's like the next level. You mentioned this thing that you were listening to this, and I'll leave you on this note. But I was writing out this idea, and I asked it to give me like because it's still something that I'm working on. But I asked ChatGPT to give me like a little breakdown of this idea, like in a little flow chart. So I'll read this to you.
And do you think there's a way you could share the name of the Messiah paper?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll put that on the Discord. Are you on Jacob's Discord?
I'm not.
Yeah, so I could put it on here. I'll do it. I'll put it on. Can I? I think I could put a link over here. One moment.
I would also recommend you join Jacob's Discord server.
Yeah. Where have you been, Nick?
I'm not on here as much as you think, but I do love being on here.
I'd love to talk to you about economics sometime.
For sure. I don't know as much about economics as you think I do. At least not like classical, traditional economics.
What is going on over here? Come on now.
I do think Israel has a unique opportunity in like forming a, I guess, like religion-centered government. I guess like Muslim countries have tried to do that, but I don't know, maybe.
It's gonna be fantastic. Don't worry. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like this. Mythic civilization, symbolic, sacred kingship is Babylon. That moves on to the empire and administration, law, governance, order we see in Persia. We move on to the rational civilization, philosophy, logic, science, Greece. We then move on to the institutional civilization, law, engineering, global systems is Rome. Then we move on to modern technological civilization, science, industry, globalization is the modern West.
Do you think
The
you should share the text on screen?
Should I do it over here? Yeah, sure. I could share this text.
It's just easier to follow along that
Yeah. I got you. Do. Not this one. Not that one. Okay. This is the roadmap, the milestones of our civilization. Mythic civilization, like we said, symbolic sacred kingship, we see in Babylon. We move on to empire of administration, law, governance, order in Persia. We elevate into the rational civilization of philosophy, logic, and science with Greece. We move on to the institutional civilization of law, engineering, and global systems with Rome. We then phase shift to the modern technological civilization, science, industry, globalization with the modern West. We then hit the analytic civilization peak, artificial intelligence, AI, externalizing analytic cognition. I write about this being Bina, automated. Bina is an idea in Judaism. There's Bina and Chokhmah. These are two different ideas. But basically, Bina is automated, meaning that this analytic idea, right? Like the example I give is with Waze, with GPSs today. I no longer have to have the map in my head because I could give that to the AI, and I could clear my mind, so to speak. I could give it more room to be thinking of other things. Civilizational transition, global instability. That's where I would say we are right now. Narrative struggles, right? I need a king. I need a this, the meaning crisis. Israel becomes a symbolic focal point. Pax Judaica narrative emerges. This is something that I don't think people should get into. Pax Judaica, however, I'm refuting this. Ethical crossroads. Humanity gains unprecedented power. AI plus biotechnology plus planetary systems. Moving on to need for moral framework, right? Intelligence alone is insufficient. Return to wisdom, chokhmah. My attitude is that AI, if done properly, allows us to focus less on the bina, the analytical, and come into the deeper human cognition of chokhmah, which allows us to move on to prophetic consciousness, right? Integration of intellect, ethics, imagination, and meaning. Global moral civilization, the prophetic vision of Isaiah, nation shall not lift up and sword against nation, ethical order spreads voluntarily. So that is the mission. That is the vision that we have. And I believe we are, like I said, I believe we are getting close to the end over here. And hence, when you're asking me like where we are, like in the world, I feel like we're in this Kairos moment, so to speak, right? Where we're getting to this change. And it really depends how we're going to use this power, right? Rabbi Cook talks about how we could potentially, with human science and cognition, We could reverse death, right? Longevity medicine. You could. Who knows what we could do? What would define that as the resurrection of the dead would be the intention behind that. Is it the righteous man doing it? Is it the righteous church father? Is it the righteous Jewish sage? Or is it a bro in Silicon Valley? Because that is called necromancy. And it really depends what we're doing with the world we have right now. So I believe we're getting to a place where we're going to have to go back to the moral systems, and those moral systems are religious systems ultimately. But hey, what do I know, dude?
Okay. So I think you want to wrap up here.
Yes, I'm going to wrap up here.
One thing is, I just want to say, please check out what I linked in Discord. The thing about Shabbat outside of time or something like that is the name of it. The thing about the relationship between Shabbat and temporality. Because I would like to talk to you about it on Wednesday.
Can you resend it or tag me on it?
Okay, I'll tag you on it.
Yeah, and can you put a link to the Discord in the chat as well?
To the Discord. I think I could do that as well. One moment, please. I want to send that other document.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the return to wisdom, because I've heard people talk about how like the 2010s, where it's a very like, I guess especially in the US, was a very like liberal kind of age where everyone was like, my body, my choice, I do whatever I want. And then the thing is, like, the world has this natural order to it where if you go too much against it, then it'll sort of revert back to like its ideal order. And so you have like in the 2020s this like sort of rebellion against what happened last decade, and people are returning to religion because I guess like that age of atheism and liberalism like dragged people away from that natural order. And that's, I guess people say like that's a big reason why you have a lot of people becoming religious, to find out like who they are and what's I guess the purpose of this life.
Well, yeah, I would say Israel. I mean, that is, I would say, one of the elements of anti-Semitism that we see as well, which is like the world wants, it might sound controversial, we could either be Jesus or we could be Judas, right? There's nothing in between. And I think we in Israel are still stuttering with saying who we are. And this is also an issue. This is something I discuss with my Muslim counterparts when I say, like, I am the descendant of Isaac back to my land. As your Quran says, I would come back to my land. And I see you as the son of Ishmael, and I want to welcome you back in my tent. But this is not a kumbaya conversation. I know who I am. And I think we need to be more clear on who we are. And that relates obviously to the Jewish democratic state, all those questions.
Yeah, secular people, that's a big problem for them.
The secular people?
Yeah, like what is their identity in? Because like we get from Genesis, like how we're all made in the image and likeness of God. So that's like where Abrahamic people get their identity. But for secular people, it's like, yeah, what are they rooted in?
Well, first of all, the Talmud has a great line, which is, I mention it often, which is all who reject idolatry are considered a Jew, right? And there's a sense where I would even say that being an atheist is really giving you a shield. It's a necessary process. It's allowing them to reject notions that weren't true. I don't want them to believe in the man in the sky. It's much bigger than that. It's much greater than the man in the sky. It's much greater than a man with a beard that says, don't do that. And I believe that's the process they need to be able to plow through to get to their better understanding. They reject, and they also want the full picture today. And I call this the Greta Thunberg energy. People want to understand like how they could change global warming, social justice, right? Telling them put on phylacteries because it's the right thing to do that's not going to work. People don't just because Jesus said so. Explain to me why by giving charity or by being nice? Like, how am I changing the world? And religions have answers for that. We just don't give those answers anymore. We don't explain to the world why. In my phylacteries, there's a parchment. On it, it says that God freed us from Egypt. And that idea is because God wants people to be free. And the idea of people being free is people being able to live comfortably and honorably. And that means we have enough abundance in this world to make sure that there aren't starving people in the world. And that's why when I put up phylacteries in the day, I'm not just thinking about, I did what God wanted me to do according to Law 5:6. Putting this on reminds me that ultimately my mission is to make sure that famine is addressed in the world. And that is the energy people are hungry for. Give me that. Don't give me a sermon. Don't give me they want more. So, or again, that's at least what I feel.
No, I'm totally with you on that. It's like understanding why God wants us to be free and to be with him. So everything that he does is out of love. And it's not just the understanding that everything's rooted in love. I think that's what secular people can get from us.
Why can't I share? I can't share. So we're going to have to do it differently. What we're going to have to do is Discord. I'll put it on Discord, but I'll send you a Discord link. So you could attach to that. How do I do that again? Invite to server. Gotcha. Copy link. Boom. Pow. Swap. Bam. Link added. You could join through this. I will now also put it in Jacob's server in links. I see you just wrote to me to please read. I got it. And I'm now adding in links the name of Mashiach. Shmo Shel Mashiach. Again, please be gentle. This was a very impromptu translation on ChatGPT from a Hebrew class I'm giving into English. So I don't take responsibility on the format. What do we have over here? Regrettably, Christian leaders have the same attitude problem as the Pharisees had at the time of Jesus and the prophets. And it was not only towards Jesus, but King David was the first ordered to be killed. All right. I some disagreements with that, but generally, yeah, sure. Despite him killing the Goliath. Fascinating also about Goliath, the great-grandson or the great-great-grandson of the fallen angels, Azael and Shamchazai. The Midrash and the Book of Enoch also talk about how before the flood, there's these two angels, and they are mocking the humans. And they're saying, look at them messing around, screwing up. And God says, please, if you guys were there with evil inclination, you wouldn't be able to handle it. And they're like, no way. They're like, let us go down. We'll show you. God says, sure, do your thing. They go down. They get corrupt. They teach people, weaponry and violence. And Tubal Cain, they're teaching them all those kind of weapons and stuff. And I think they say something like makeup to women. Shamchazai decides to repent, and he then gets caught in this limbo stage. But Azael doesn't repent, and then he gets chained into this, I forget the exact term, but into the mountains, these strong mountains in the desert. Go all the way to when the priest gives the offering, the goat offering to Azazel, right? One in the Day of Atonement. One gets chucked off the mountain to Azazel. How could it be that we are recognizing some sort of other force out there? Is that not idolatry? How is God telling us to bring this sacrifice? The answer is, it is not idolatry specifically because God is commanding us to do so, right? The cherubs, if we would build them without God's commandment, would be idolatry. Because God commanded it, then that is okay. So here there's a sense where we are there to recognize that there are other powers out there in the world. There are evils out there, but they are all reign under God's jurisdiction and commandment. And even bringing the sin offering to it has this recognition. So these angels, the Nephilim, so to speak, the daughters of men, right? They had this they had this relationship, And this leads the birth of the giants, who are, for example, the most famous of them are Og, the king of Bashan, who was massive. And then they have children, the Rephaim. Those Rephaim are smaller. There's Sichon, the king of the Amorites. And lastly, we have like Goliath and his brother, Talmi. And these are smaller giants as well. So I don't know why I went on that little explanation about the Goliath, but I just thought you guys should know where he originates from. All right. Instead of teaching about living God, everyone should have a connection with the engage in endless discussion concerning events thousands of years ago. While if Jesus' message would be put really short, it would be, you don't need books to know God. I mean, the prophets say you don't need God is not asking for the sacrifices, right? That's not ultimately what he wants from us. He wants us all to phase shift, all to level up. As they say in Arabic, shwaya shwaya, slowly, slowly. These things take time. Like I said, the Declaration of Independence didn't come out of nowhere, and look where we've come from there. So we're getting there. We're getting there. And again, I say this again, the energy of the October 7th riots on campuses in America is messianic energy. I, of course, believe they are not oriented properly, right? I think they're missing the picture. But the fact that all this youth is hungry they want justice, they want more, this is power that we need to harness. This is part of that it's important. All right. I've gone on too much. Catch you guys later. Catch you in the flip. God bless.
Awesome.
Stay safe.
Always good talking with you, Hezzy.
Catch you. All right. Very nice.